Tonight, we explore beginner's mind, one of the most beautiful and practical teachings in all of Zen Buddhism. Beginner's mind teaches us something simple yet profound. It shows us how to approach life with fresh eyes, open hearts, and genuine curiosity. Not by forcing ourselves to be different, but by recognizing what becomes possible when we let go of always needing to know, always needing to be certain, always needing to have everything figured out. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. As we journey through these teachings tonight, you may find your breathing naturally deepening, your mind naturally settling. This is not something you need to make happen. It is the natural response when we stop struggling and allow ourselves to simply be present. The stories and teachings will unfold gently, carrying you deeper into rest with each one. Simply allow yourself to listen, to receive, to let these ancient wisdoms settle into you like nourishing rain soaking into earth. Let us begin this gentle journey together. In Zen Buddhism, there is a beautiful teaching called beginner's mind. It points to a way of approaching life with fresh openness, as if encountering everything for the first time. This is not about pretending to be ignorant or throwing away what we know. It is about holding our knowledge lightly enough that we remain available to new understanding. Have you ever tried to learn something new, only to find yourself thinking, "Yes, I know this already"? That small voice of resistance that rises up when we feel we already understand. Most of us encounter this voice regularly. We think we already know what the other person is going to say, so we stop really listening. We think we understand a concept, so we stop examining it closely. This habit shapes our lives more than we realize. When we approach everything with certainty that we already know, we close ourselves off from new understanding. The teacher who could help us cannot reach us. The book that contains valuable insights slides past us. The experience that could transform us leaves us unchanged because we are too busy comparing it to what we already think we know. We miss opportunities for growth. We stay stuck in familiar patterns. We repeat the same mistakes. This is the cost of being full. Beginner's mind addresses the problem of fullness directly. It teaches us that real learning often requires letting go of what we think we already know. Not to become ignorant, but to become open. Not to forget everything, but to create space for something new to enter. In Zen, there is a teaching about this using a simple image. Imagine you are holding a cup. If that cup is already full to the brim, what happens when someone tries to pour fresh tea into it? The tea simply overflows and is wasted. The tea might be the finest in the world, brewed with perfect care, but your full cup cannot receive it. The problem is not the tea. The problem is your fullness. Our minds work the same way. When we approach life with our minds already full of opinions, conclusions, and fixed beliefs, we cannot receive anything new. The wisdom being offered to us simply overflows and is lost. This teaching invites us to notice how full we have become. Not full of genuine wisdom, but full of assumptions we have mistaken for wisdom. Full of second-hand knowledge we have never tested. Full of conclusions we reached long ago and never questioned since. Beginner's mind starts with recognizing this fullness. Once we see how full we are, we can begin to explore what it might mean to empty ourselves. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. There once lived a scholar named Hideo who had devoted his entire life to studying Buddhist philosophy. For 40 years, he had read every text he could find. His home was filled with ancient scrolls and manuscripts. The walls were lined with wooden shelves holding rare books he had collected from across the country. He could recite complete sutras from memory. He could debate the most subtle points of doctrine with anyone. Students traveled to sit at his feet and learn from his vast knowledge. Hideo took genuine pride in his learning. He had sacrificed much for his studies. While others pursued worldly success, he had pursued understanding. While others accumulated wealth, he had accumulated knowledge. He saw himself as a keeper of wisdom, someone who had mastered the teachings through decades of devoted study. One autumn, travelers passing through his town spoke of a Zen master who lived in a remote mountain monastery. This master, they said, understood Buddhist truth in a way that went beyond books and scholarly debate. People claimed that even brief conversations with him could shift your entire understanding of reality. When Hideo heard these stories, he felt both curious and skeptical. How could an isolated mountain monk know more than someone who had studied for 40 years? What could this hermit possibly understand that was not already contained in the texts Hideo had mastered? Still, the stories intrigued him enough that he decided to make the journey. Perhaps he could test this master's knowledge. Perhaps he could even correct any misunderstandings the master might have. The journey to the monastery took 3 days of difficult travel. The mountain paths were steep and rocky. Hideo was not accustomed to such physical exertion. His body ached. His feet developed painful blisters. By the time he finally reached the temple gates, he was exhausted and irritable. A young monk, perhaps 16 years old, greeted him at the entrance. The boy bowed respectfully and led Hideo through the monastery grounds in silence. The place was surprisingly plain. No impressive buildings. No elaborate gardens. Just simple wooden structures arranged around a courtyard where fallen leaves gathered against the walls. Everything looked worn from use and weather. The young monk brought Hideo to a small room where Master Bankei was waiting. The master sat on a faded cushion near a low wooden table. He was much older than Hideo had imagined, perhaps 80, with deep lines in his weathered face. His hands were rough and scarred, the hands of someone who had done physical labor for many years. He wore the same simple robes as the young monk, patched and faded. Hideo felt a wave of disappointment. This ordinary old man was the great teacher everyone spoke of? He had expected someone more impressive, more refined. "Welcome, friend," Master Bankei said with a gentle bow. His voice was soft but clear. "Please, sit. You look tired from your journey. May I offer you some tea?" Hideo sat down on the cushion across from the master. "Yes, thank you. I have traveled far to meet you." Master Bankei nodded and began preparing tea. He worked slowly, giving careful attention to each small action. He rinsed a ceramic teapot with hot water. He measured tea leaves from a plain wooden box. He waited patiently as fresh water heated over a small charcoal brazier. As the master prepared the tea in silence, Hideo grew uncomfortable. He was accustomed to being recognized for his achievements. He had expected the master to ask about his background, to show interest in his learning. But Master Bankei seemed completely absorbed in making tea. Unable to bear the silence, Hideo felt compelled to establish who he was. "I should tell you that I am not an ordinary student," he began. "I have studied Buddhist texts for 40 years. I have read the Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the Lotus Sutra. I have studied all the major commentaries. I understand the concept of emptiness, the doctrine of no self, the principles of enlightenment. I have debated with scholars throughout the region." Master Bankei continued preparing the tea. He tested the water temperature. He warmed 2 small clay cups. His face showed no particular reaction to Hideo's impressive credentials. Hideo continued talking, his voice gaining emphasis. I have devoted my entire life to understanding the Dharma. I can explain the most complex philosophical points. I have memorized countless teachings. But despite all my knowledge, I feel something is missing. I can explain enlightenment in perfect theoretical terms, but I want to understand the direct experience. I want to know what all these texts are actually pointing toward. The master smiled slightly and picked up the teapot. He began pouring the pale green tea into Hideyo's cup. The liquid steamed gently as it flowed from the spout. The delicate aroma of green tea filled the small room. As the cup filled, Hideo kept talking. He described his favorite sutras. He explained his theories about how wisdom develops. He outlined his questions about the relationship between study and practice. He shared his ideas about enlightenment and how close he must be to achieving it after so many years of dedicated learning. The tea reached the rim of the cup. Master Bankei kept pouring with a steady hand. The tea began to overflow. It spilled over the edge of the cup onto the wooden tray beneath. Still the master poured, the stream of tea continuing to flow. The tea ran off the tray onto the woven straw mat below, creating a small puddle. The master's hand remained perfectly steady, still pouring as if nothing unusual was happening. Hideo watched with growing alarm. "Stop," he finally cried out. "Master, please stop. The cup is full. Can't you see? It cannot hold any more. You're wasting the tea." Master Bankei set down the teapot carefully and looked at Hideo with eyes that held both kindness and amusement. "Like this cup," he said softly. "You are full of your own opinions, your own knowledge, your own ideas about Buddhism. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" The words struck Hideo like a sudden wind. For a moment, he could not breathe. He sat frozen, watching the spilled tea soak into the mat. He opened his mouth to respond, to defend himself, to explain that his knowledge was different, that his understanding was based on genuine study. But then he closed his mouth without speaking. What could he say? For 40 years, he had been filling his cup with ideas about truth. Concepts upon concepts. Theories upon theories. He had spent decades accumulating knowledge, always seeking to understand more, to know better, to master every teaching. He had come to this mountain to add one more thing to his vast collection of learning. He had not come to empty himself. He had not come to question his understanding. He had come to demonstrate how much he knew, to confirm his own wisdom. The scholar sat in silence, watching the dark stain spread across the mat. In that moment, looking at the overflow, he understood something he had missed in 40 years of study. He had been collecting answers without ever truly opening himself to the questions. He had been building walls of knowledge around himself, walls that protected him from genuine encounter with reality as it actually is. "Forgive me, Master," Hideo said quietly. His voice sounded different now, softer, uncertain. "I see now that I did not come here to learn. I came here to show you how much I already know. I came seeking confirmation, not truth." Master Bankei picked up a cloth and began wiping up the spilled tea. He moved with the same careful attention he had shown while preparing it. "There is nothing to forgive," he said gently. "Many people come here with full cups. I once had a full cup myself. The important thing is that you have noticed. This noticing is the beginning of emptying." He wrung out the cloth and looked at Hideo with clear eyes. "Your 40 years of study are not wasted. The texts you have read contain genuine wisdom. But there is a difference between knowing about wisdom and being wisdom. A map of a territory is not the territory itself. You have been studying maps for 40 years. Perhaps now you are ready to take your first actual step on the ground. Take a gentle breath now. Feel what it might be like to set down, just for a moment, the weight of everything you think you already understand. This story reveals something essential about beginner's mind. Hideo's knowledge was not wrong. The sutras he had studied did contain wisdom, but his relationship to that knowledge had become a barrier. He wore his learning like armor that protected him from having to change. The problem was not that Hideo knew too much. The problem was that he believed his knowledge was complete. He approached the master with his cup already full. There was no room left for anything new to enter. We can learn from this. Knowing about something is not the same as knowing something directly. You can read 100 books describing the taste of a peach, but until you actually bite into the fruit, you do not truly know what a peach tastes like. Hideo had spent 40 years reading about awakening without ever taking a direct bite of reality itself. The empty cup teaching reminds us that learning is not always about adding more. Sometimes real learning requires emptying out what we think we know so we can experience things freshly. This does not mean forgetting everything. It means holding our knowledge lightly enough that new understanding can slip in beside it. What fills your cup? For Hideo, it was Buddhist philosophy. For you, it might be something entirely different. Perhaps your cup is full of beliefs about who you are. Perhaps it is full of judgments about other people. Perhaps it is full of assumptions about what life should look like. Perhaps it is full of past experiences that tell you what to expect. Whatever fills your cup, beginner's mind invites you to simply notice the fullness. We all carry these accumulations of belief and conclusion. The question is whether we can become aware of them, whether we can see how they shape what we are able to perceive. Let us explore another story that reveals a different aspect of this same teaching. In a village known for its skilled craftsmen, there lived a young carpenter named Anjo, who had recently completed 7 years of apprenticeship under a master builder. He had learned every traditional technique for working with wood. He knew which tools to use for different tasks. He knew how to select timber by examining the grain and testing for hidden flaws. He knew how to cut joints so precise they needed no nails, how to follow the natural patterns in wood to create pieces of great strength and beauty. Anjo was proud of his training, and rightfully so. He had worked hard, rising before dawn to practice, studying late into the night. He had earned his status as a journeyman carpenter through genuine dedication and skill. Other young men in the village looked up to him as someone who had mastered his craft. When the village decided to build a new meditation hall at the local temple, Anjo immediately volunteered. This would be his chance to demonstrate his abilities. On the first morning, Anjo arrived before anyone else. The sun was just beginning to lighten the sky. The air smelled of dew and fresh-cut timber. Anjo walked around the building site, noting where he would make improvements to the plans. Soon other carpenters began to arrive. Among them was an old man named Saburo, who had been building in the village for over 50 years. His back was bent. His hands were gnarled and scarred. He moved slowly, but his eyes were bright. "Good morning, Elder," Anjo said with a respectful bow. "I am ready to begin work. I have several ideas about how we should approach this project efficiently." Saburo looked up from a piece of timber he had been examining and smiled gently. "Good morning, young Anjo. I am grateful for your help. Your teacher tells me you learned well from him." He ran his weathered hand along the wood. "But before we begin, Would you help me with something?" "Of course," Anjo said, eager to be useful. Saburo selected a rough piece of pine from the stack and handed it to Anjo. It was perhaps 2 feet long, still showing saw marks along its edges. "Tell me about this wood." Anjo examined it quickly, the way he had been trained to assess lumber. "This is pine. It is softer than oak, but easier to work with. Good for interior walls, but not suitable for load-bearing beams. The grain runs fairly straight, which makes it appropriate for planking. This particular piece has no major defects that I can see. It should serve well for the project." "Very good," Saburo said, nodding. "You know wood well. Your training was thorough." He paused. "Now, would you do something for me? Would you sit with this piece of pine for a while? Just hold it. Feel its weight. Notice its color in this morning light. Pay attention to its smell. See what the wood itself wants to tell you, not what your training tells you about wood in general." Anjo felt a flash of impatience. He had already examined the wood and given his professional assessment. He already knew about pine. Every carpenter knew about pine. Why waste precious time on such a simple exercise when there was so much work to be done? He could hear the other carpenters already beginning to measure and mark. The sound of their activity filled the air. He wanted to be part of that productive work, not sitting idly. But he respected Saburo too much to refuse. The old carpenter had a reputation for quiet wisdom, even if his methods sometimes seemed unusual. So Anjo walked to a large flat stone at the edge of the work site and sat down, holding the piece of pine in his hands. At first, his mind filled with everything he had learned about pine. He mentally reviewed the different grades of pine wood. He thought about proper techniques for cutting it, sanding it, joining it. He remembered projects he had completed using pine. Technical facts and procedures flowed through his mind. But Saburo had asked him to just sit and hold the wood. So Anjo tried to quiet his thinking and simply pay attention. As the minutes passed and he continued sitting quietly, something began to shift in his awareness. He noticed that this particular piece had a small knot about halfway along its length. The knot created a darker circle in the pale wood, with the grain fibers swirling around it like water flowing around a stone. He had seen thousands of knots before, but he had never really looked at one this closely. The pattern was beautiful, like a small spiral captured in the wood. He felt the slight roughness where the saw had cut through. He detected a faint scent that reminded him of forest walks after rain. Not just the generic smell of pine, but something more particular. He observed how the morning sun made the grain shimmer. Light and shadow played across the surface as clouds passed overhead, revealing depths he had not noticed. The wood contained shades ranging from pale cream to rich gold to hints of orange. The longer he sat, the more he noticed. The weight of the wood in his hands, the way it had warmed from his body heat. Small imperfections that gave it character. The grain patterns told a story of the tree's growth, years of rain and drought recorded in the varying widths of the rings. After some time, Anjo heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see Saburo making his way over. The old carpenter sat down on the stone beside him with a quiet groan, his aging joints protesting the movement. "What did you discover?" Saburo asked gently. Anjo looked down at the wood in his hands, surprised by how much he wanted to share. "This wood," he said slowly, searching for the right words, "is not just pine in general. It is this particular piece of pine, with its own character and story. I have worked with hundreds of pieces of wood, maybe thousands during my training. But I realize now that I have never really looked at any of them this closely. I have been seeing what I expected to see, what I was taught to look for, not what was actually there in front of me. He turned the piece over in his hands, feeling its texture. I can tell you all the technical properties of pine. I can tell you exactly how to work with it. But until this morning, I had never actually met a piece of pine. I had only met my ideas and knowledge about pine. Saburo nodded slowly, a small smile appearing on his weathered face. You have good training, Anjo. Your teachers gave you valuable knowledge. The techniques they taught you are sound and will serve you well. But knowledge can sometimes become like a veil that prevents us from seeing what is right in front of us. We think we already know what pine is, so we stop actually looking at the pine in our hands. We see through our concepts instead of seeing the thing itself. The old carpenter stood up slowly. Every piece of wood is different. Every joint we cut will be unique to that particular moment. Every building has its own spirit that emerges as we work with it. If we approach our work with our heads too full of what we already know, we miss the chance to learn from the wood itself, to listen to what it wants to become, to let the building teach us how it wants to be built. He placed a hand on Anjo's shoulder. Your knowledge is valuable. But knowledge, combined with fresh seeing, is even better. The most skilled craftsmen I have known were those who could hold their expertise lightly, who remained curious and open even after decades of experience. From that day forward, Anjo approached his work differently. Before cutting any piece of wood, he would take a moment to really look at it, to feel its weight and texture, to notice what made it different from every other piece he had worked with. Sometimes this careful attention revealed hidden flaws he would have otherwise missed. Sometimes it showed him possibilities and patterns he would have overlooked. Always it helped him work in harmony with the natural character of the material rather than forcing his will upon it. When the meditation hall was finally completed many months later, everyone in the village remarked on its simple beauty and solid construction. The building seemed to sit naturally on the land, as if it had always belonged there. The proportions felt right. The wood had been chosen and placed with obvious care and attention. The head priest thanked all the carpenters when the work was finished. When he spoke to Anjo, he said, "Your work shows great maturity for someone so young. You clearly have skill, but more than that, you have attention. I can see in these joints and beams that you were listening to the wood, not just imposing technique upon it." Later, when Saburo asked Anjo what he had learned from the project, the young carpenter said, "I learned that 7 years of training taught me how to be a carpenter. But 3 months of actually paying attention taught me how to meet wood. My training gave me the tools and techniques, but attention gave me the relationship. Both are necessary, but I had been trying to work with only one." Take a gentle breath and notice what it feels like in your body when you approach something without needing to prove what you already know. This story shows us another way our cups become full. It is not just intellectual knowledge that fills us. It is also our past experiences, our training, our habits of perception. Anjo had real skill as a carpenter. His training was valuable, but he had begun to see wood through the lens of his knowledge rather than seeing wood as it actually was. Beginner's mind does not mean throwing away what we have learned. Anjo did not forget his carpentry skills. Instead, he learned to hold his knowledge more lightly. He learned to let his training inform his work without letting it blind him to what was present. This is what the empty cup points toward. Not ignorance, but openness. Not forgetting, but seeing freshly. When we empty our cup, we make room for reality as it actually is, not just as we expect it to be. In your own life, you bring experience and knowledge to everything you do. This is natural and often helpful. The question is, does your knowledge serve you, or do you serve your knowledge? Can you hold what you know lightly enough that you remain open to new discovery? Consider something you have done thousands of times. Perhaps making your morning tea. Perhaps walking a familiar path. Perhaps talking with someone you have known for years. Do you really see these activities anymore, or do you simply go through the motions based on habit? What might you discover if you could approach them as if for the first time? The empty cup is not about becoming empty of everything. It is about becoming empty of fixed ideas and rigid conclusions so we can be full of fresh perception. It is about creating space for what wants to emerge, rather than forcing everything to fit the patterns we established in the past. Master Bankei did not tell Hideo to burn his books. He simply showed him that his fullness was preventing him from receiving anything new. Saburo did not tell Anjo that his training was worthless. He helped him see that real mastery comes from combining knowledge with fresh attention. Both stories point to the same truth. We can learn to empty our cups not just once, but continuously. Each moment invites us to set down our assumptions and meet life directly. Each encounter offers us the choice to respond from what we already know or to respond from fresh awareness. This is the foundation of beginner's mind. Before we can see with fresh eyes, before we can embrace not knowing, before we can approach life with wonder, we may first need to recognize how full we have become. We can notice the weight of our opinions and fixed ideas. We can observe how our certainty shapes what we perceive. And we can be willing to pour out that fullness so we can receive what each moment offers. As you rest now with these teachings, simply notice: what fills your cup? What beliefs and assumptions do you carry? What knowledge do you hold so tightly that it has become a barrier rather than a tool? There is no need to force anything. Simply notice the fullness with gentle awareness. This noticing itself is the beginning of emptying. The cup that knows it is full can begin to pour itself out. The mind that recognizes its own certainty can begin to soften into openness. This is where the path of beginner's mind begins. With simple, honest recognition of how we meet each moment, with gentle willingness to set down what we think we know and open ourselves to what actually is. There is something that happens to us as we grow familiar with our lives. The route we walk every day becomes invisible. The face we see across the breakfast table becomes a habit. The work we do with our hands becomes automatic. We move through our days half asleep, going through motions we have repeated so many times that we no longer need to pay attention. This is not laziness. This is how our minds work. They create patterns and shortcuts to save energy. Once we have learned something, once we have seen something enough times, our minds stop looking closely. They fill in the details from memory instead of gathering them fresh from the world. This is efficient, but it comes at a cost. We stop seeing what is actually there. We see what we expect to see. We see yesterday's sunrise instead of today's. We see the person we married 20 years ago instead of the person sitting across from us now. We see the job we started doing years ago instead of the work that is actually in front of us today. Beginner's mind invites us to see with fresh eyes. Not once in a while, but as a way of being. This is one of the most profound practices in Zen. To look at the familiar as if we have never seen it before. To approach the ordinary as if it were extraordinary. to notice what has been here all along, waiting patiently for our attention to return. When we see with fresh eyes, the world becomes alive again. Colors become brighter. Details emerge that we had stopped noticing. People reveal depths we had forgotten they possessed. Even our own lives become interesting again, no longer just a series of repeated patterns, but a constantly unfolding story. This is not about trying to feel amazed or forcing ourselves to see beauty where we do not feel it. It is about removing the veil of familiarity that has settled over our perception. It is about letting things be what they actually are instead of what we have decided they are. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. There once lived a calligrapher named Makoto, who was known throughout the region for the beauty of his work. For 30 years, he had practiced his art with dedication. Every morning, he would rise before dawn and spend 2 hours writing characters with brush and ink. His strokes were confident and graceful. His work was sought after by temples and wealthy families alike. Makoto had a particular way he liked to begin each day. After his morning practice, he would walk through the garden behind his house on his way to the well to wash his brushes. The garden was small and simple. A stone path wound between a few carefully placed rocks and several old pine trees. A small pond reflected the sky. Nothing elaborate or impressive, just a quiet space that belonged to his home. He had walked this path thousands of times. In spring, in summer, in autumn, in winter, in morning light and evening shadow. He knew every stone, every tree, every turn of the path. His feet found their way without his mind needing to guide them. He would walk, thinking about the day ahead, planning his work, reviewing conversations he needed to have. One morning, after a night of heavy rain, Makoto finished his calligraphy practice and stepped out into the garden as usual. The air was fresh and clean. The sky was clearing. He began walking the familiar path toward the well, his mind already occupied with thoughts about a commission he had received. But something made him pause. Perhaps it was the quality of the light after the rain. Perhaps it was a bird call he had not heard before. Perhaps it was nothing he could name. But he stopped walking and, for the first time in years, actually looked at the garden around him. The rain had left water droplets on every surface. The morning sun caught these droplets and turned them into tiny prisms. The old pine tree that he passed every day was covered in thousands of glittering points of light, each one holding a miniature rainbow. He had never noticed this before, though it must have happened after every rain. The moss on the rocks along the path had turned a shade of green so vivid it almost hurt to look at. How long had it been that green? Had it always been that green and he had simply stopped seeing it? He noticed that one of the rocks near the pond had a small crack running through it. Water had gathered in the crack, and a tiny insect was drinking from it. The scene was so small, so ordinary, yet he found himself completely absorbed in watching this insect go about its business. He walked slowly to the pond and knelt beside it. The water was very still. He could see his own reflection clearly on the surface, but he could also see through the water to the smooth stones at the bottom, and he could see the reflection of the sky and clouds. All three layers visible at once: the surface, the depth, the reflection. How many times had he glanced at this pond without really seeing it? Makoto stayed in the garden for over an hour that morning. He looked at things he had seen every day for 30 years as if he had never seen them before. The way lichen grew in patterns on the north side of a rock. The particular curve of a pine branch. The sound of water dripping from leaves. The smell of wet earth and vegetation. When he finally went inside, he found he could not work on his commission. His mind was too full of what he had just seen. Instead, he took out fresh paper and began to paint. Not characters, but images. The pine tree with its droplets of light, the vivid moss, the layered pond. The paintings were unlike anything he had created before. They were simpler than his usual work, but they held something alive in them. People who saw them later said they could feel the freshness of the morning in those images. But more important than the paintings was what happened to Makoto himself. He began to walk differently through his days. He began to actually see the people he spoke with, to notice the changes in their faces and voices. He began to taste his tea instead of simply drinking it. He began to feel the brush in his hand instead of just using it automatically. His calligraphy changed too. It became more spontaneous, more alive. People said his work had always been technically perfect, but now it had something else. A presence, an attention, as if each stroke was made with complete awareness rather than from habit. One day, a student asked him what had changed in his practice. Makoto thought for a long moment before answering. "I stopped assuming I knew what things looked like," he said. "For 30 years, I walked through my garden seeing the garden I remembered instead of the garden that was actually there. I wrote characters I remembered instead of characters I was actually creating in that moment. I had stopped being present for my own life." The student looked puzzled. "But you were there. How could you not be present?" Makoto smiled. "My body was there. My hands were there. But my attention was somewhere else. I was living in memory and habit instead of in reality. The garden changed every day, every hour, but I only saw my idea of the garden. It took a moment of actually looking to show me the difference." Take a gentle breath now. Notice what you are seeing around you at this moment. This story shows us something essential about seeing with fresh eyes. Makoto had not changed. The garden had not changed. But everything was different because he had finally brought his full attention to what was actually present. We can all recognize this experience. We live in houses we no longer really see. We drive routes we no longer truly notice. We interact with people we love but have stopped really looking at. Our minds are so full of memory and expectation that we miss what is actually here. Beginner's mind teaches us that fresh seeing is always available to us. We do not need to go somewhere new or find something extraordinary. We only need to bring our full attention to what is already here. The familiar, when truly seen, becomes new again. Makoto's garden had always held that beauty. The morning light had caught the raindrops in exactly that way countless times before. But he had not been present to see it. His eyes were open, but he was not truly looking. When he finally looked, the world revealed itself. This is not about trying to see things differently or forcing ourselves to appreciate what is around us. It is about removing the filter of assumption that prevents us from seeing at all. When we approach something familiar as if we have never encountered it before, we allow it to show us what it actually is rather than what we think it is. Let us explore another story that shows a different aspect of this teaching. In a monastery high in the mountains, there lived a cook named Oshin, who had been preparing meals for the monks for 20 years. 3 times each day, she would cook rice, vegetables, and soup for the community. The same simple food, prepared in the same simple way, year after year. Oshin took pride in her work, but after 20 years, the routine had become so familiar that she could prepare an entire meal without thinking about it. Her hands knew exactly how much rice to measure, how much water to add, how long to let it cook. She could chop vegetables while her mind wandered to other thoughts. The work happened automatically, efficiently, perfectly. One autumn, a new monk arrived at the monastery. His name was Jiro, and he had been assigned to help Oshin in the kitchen as part of his training. On his first morning, he entered the kitchen while Oshin was preparing breakfast. Oshin was moving through her usual routine. She measured rice into a pot, added water, set it to cook. She began chopping vegetables for the soup. Her movements were quick and sure, the result of 2 decades of daily practice. Jiro watched her work for a few moments, then asked, "May I help with the vegetables?" Oshin handed him a knife and a radish. "Cut it into thin slices," she instructed, then returned to her own work. After a few minutes, she glanced over to see how he was doing. Jiro was still working on the same radish. He was cutting very slowly, examining each slice carefully before making the next cut. "You need to work faster than that," Oshin said, a touch of impatience in her voice. "We have to feed 40 monks, and breakfast must be ready soon." Jiro nodded but did not speed up. He continued his careful, slow cutting. Oshin finished her own vegetables and came over to see what was taking him so long. "What are you doing?" she asked. Jiro held up a thin slice of radish. "Have you ever really looked at a radish?" he asked. The way the white flesh gradates to pale green at the edges, the delicate pattern of fiber running through it. Each slice is slightly different from the one before it. Oshin was about to tell him they did not have time for such observations when something made her stop. She took the slice of radish from his hand and looked at it. Really looked at it. She had cut thousands of radishes in her life, maybe tens of thousands. But she could not remember the last time she had actually seen one. The slice was beautiful in its simplicity. The crisp white flesh, the hint of green, the way light passed through it in some places and not in others. It looked alive in a way that surprised her. "I cook radishes every day," she said quietly. "But I have forgotten what they look like." Over the following days, Jiro's presence in the kitchen began to change how Oshin worked. He approached every simple task with complete attention. When he washed rice, he watched the water turn cloudy with starch, observed how the grains moved in the swirling water. When he stirred soup, he noticed the way steam rose and curled in the air above the pot. His slowness frustrated her at first, but gradually, his attention became infectious. She found herself pausing to notice things she had not seen in years. The particular sound rice made when it was perfectly cooked. The smell of vegetables at different stages of cooking. The weight of a knife in her hand. The coolness of water when she washed ingredients. One morning, as she was making tea for the monks, she watched the leaves unfurl in the hot water. She had made tea thousands of times, but she had never really watched this happen. The dried leaves slowly opened, releasing their color and flavor into the clear water. It was like watching flowers bloom in fast motion. How had she never noticed this? Jiro saw her watching and smiled. "Everything is interesting when we actually pay attention," he said. "But how do you maintain this attention?" Oshin asked. "How do you keep seeing things freshly when you do the same tasks every day?" "I don't know if I maintain it," Jiro admitted. "Sometimes I lose it and have to find it again. But I think the practice is to remember that each moment is new. This radish has never been cut before. This rice has never been cooked before. Each time is the first time, if we allow it to be. Oshin thought about this. For 20 years, I have been cooking the same meal. Or at least, I thought it was the same meal. But you are right. Each day is different. Each vegetable is different. Each pot of rice is unique. I just stopped noticing. From that day forward, Oshin's cooking became a meditation. Not in the sense of sitting still with closed eyes, but in the sense of bringing complete attention to what she was doing. She found that when she really paid attention, the work did not feel repetitive at all. Each meal was a new creation. Each moment in the kitchen, an opportunity to notice something she had never seen before. The monks noticed a change in the food. They could not say exactly what was different, but somehow the meals tasted more vibrant, more alive. When they asked Oshin about it, she said, "Nothing has changed. I am cooking the same food in the same way. But now I am actually present while I cook. Perhaps you can taste the attention." Years later, after Jiro had moved on to another monastery, a young monk asked Oshin about her cooking practice. She told him, "A wise young monk taught me that I had gone blind from familiarity. I had stopped seeing what was in front of me because I thought I already knew what it was. He showed me that fresh eyes are always available to us. We only have to remember to open them." This story reveals another dimension of seeing with fresh eyes. Oshin had become so skilled at her work that she no longer needed to pay attention to it. This efficiency served her in some ways, but it also meant she had lost contact with the actual experience of cooking. Jiro showed her that attention is not just about noticing beauty or finding things interesting. It is about being present for our own lives. When Oshin cooked without attention, she was not really there. Her body was moving through the motions, but she was somewhere else in her mind. When she brought her attention back, she came back to life. This teaching applies to everything we do regularly. The more familiar something becomes, the less we truly see it. We think we know what our morning coffee tastes like, so we stop tasting it. We think we know what our partner looks like, so we stop really seeing them. We think we know how to do our work, so we stop paying attention while we do it. But when we bring fresh attention to familiar things, we discover that they are not as familiar as we thought. Each cup of coffee is unique. Each person changes from day to day. Each moment of work holds something new if we are present for it. The practice of seeing with fresh eyes is not complicated. It does not require special training or unusual abilities. It simply requires remembering to look, to actually see what is in front of us, instead of seeing our memory or expectation of it. This is why beginner's mind is called a practice. It is not something we achieve once and then possess forever. It is something we return to again and again. Each time we notice we have drifted back into automatic habits of perception. We can practice this right now, wherever we are. Look at something near you as if you have never seen it before. Notice its color, its texture, its shape. Listen to the sounds around you as if you have never heard them. Feel whatever your body is touching as if you have never felt that sensation. This simple practice can transform our experience of life. Not because life changes, but because we begin to actually experience it instead of sleepwalking through it. Let us explore one more story that shows how this practice can surprise us. There was once a merchant named Haru who traveled regularly between his village and the capital city. The journey took 3 days on foot, following a well-worn road through hills and valleys. Haru had made this journey at least once each month for 15 years. He knew every landmark along the way. the twisted tree at the first hill, the stream crossing at the valley bottom, the shrine where travelers left offerings. Haru's mind was always busy during these journeys. He would calculate profits and losses. He would plan his negotiations with suppliers. He would worry about his family back home. The road was just the thing he walked on to get from one place to another. He barely saw it anymore. One spring morning, Haru set out on his monthly trip. The weather was fine, and he expected to reach the first village by evening as usual. But a few hours into his walk, he came around a bend in the road and stopped abruptly. The twisted tree was covered in blossoms. White flowers had burst from every branch, transforming the gnarled old tree into something that looked like a cloud had settled among its limbs. The sight was so beautiful, it took his breath away. Haru stood staring at the tree. He had passed this tree perhaps 200 times, but he had never seen it in bloom before. Had it never bloomed in spring? That seemed impossible. Surely it bloomed every year. But if so, how had he never noticed? He realized with a shock that he could not even say what kind of tree it was. He knew it as the twisted tree, a landmark for navigation. But he had never really looked at it. He did not know its leaves, its bark, its nature. It was just a signpost to him, marking his progress along the route. Now, seeing it in full flower, he understood that he had been walking past miracles without seeing them. The tree had been offering this beauty every spring, and he had been too preoccupied to notice. Haru continued his journey, but something had shifted in him. He found himself actually looking at the road he was walking. He noticed wildflowers growing in the grass beside the path. He saw how the light changed as the sun moved across the sky. He heard birds he had never consciously registered before. When he reached the stream crossing, he paused to watch the water flow over the rocks. He had crossed this stream hundreds of times without really seeing it. Now he noticed how clear the water was, how it caught the light, how it made gentle sounds as it moved. That night, resting at a traveler's inn, Haru thought about his journey. I have been walking this road for 15 years, he realized, but today was the first day I actually saw it. How much else have I missed while I was lost in my thoughts? From then on, Haru's monthly journeys became different. He still thought about his business, still made his plans, but he also allowed himself to see where he was, to notice the changing seasons, to observe the life happening all around him, to be present for the walk itself, not just focused on the destination. He found that this attention did not slow him down or make him less efficient at his work. If anything, he arrived at each destination more refreshed, more alert. The practice of seeing with fresh eyes became a gift he gave himself 3 days each month. Years later, someone asked him about his travels. "Don't you get bored?" they asked, "walking the same road over and over?" Haru smiled. "It is never the same road," he said. "The road is different every time. I was the one who was always the same, seeing with old eyes. When I learned to see with fresh eyes, I discovered I had been walking through a world of constant beauty without noticing it." Take a gentle breath now and notice how you feel. These stories all point to the same teaching. Fresh seeing is not about going somewhere new or finding something unusual. It is about bringing our full attention to what is already here. When we see with fresh eyes, the ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary. Not because we are forcing ourselves to find it interesting, but because we are finally allowing ourselves to see what was always there. The beauty, the detail, the constant newness that we had covered over with our assumptions and habits. This practice of fresh seeing is available to us at any moment. We do not need special circumstances or particular locations. We only need to remember to actually look, to actually listen, to actually feel what we are experiencing right now. The beginner's mind does not know what to expect. It does not have fixed ideas about what things should look like or how they should be. It is open to whatever actually appears. This openness allows reality to reveal itself as it truly is, moment by moment, always new, always changing, always offering something we have never seen before if we have the eyes to see it. As you rest with this teaching, you might experiment with it gently. Choose something very familiar to you, something you see or touch or hear every day. Something so ordinary you usually do not notice it at all. And for just a moment, allow yourself to encounter it as if for the first time. What do you discover? This simple practice, repeated again and again, can wake us up to the life we are actually living instead of the life we think we are living. It can bring us home to the present moment, which is the only place beginner's mind actually exists. We live in a world that values certainty. We are expected to have opinions on everything, to know what we think, to be able to explain and defend our positions. When someone asks us a question, we feel pressure to provide an answer. To admit, "I don't know," can feel like admitting failure or ignorance. This pressure begins early. In school, we learn that having the right answer brings praise. Not knowing brings shame. We raise our hands confidently, or we keep them down in embarrassment. This teaches us that knowledge is good and not knowing is bad. That certainty is strength and uncertainty is weakness. But beginner's mind offers a different understanding. In Zen, not knowing is not a gap to be filled or a problem to be solved. It is a doorway to wisdom. When we can honestly say, "I don't know," we create space for genuine understanding to emerge. When we release our need to have all the answers, we become available to learn. This teaching seems backwards to many people. How can not knowing be valuable? How can uncertainty be a gift? But consider this. When we think we already know something, we stop looking. We stop listening. We stop being curious. Our certainty closes doors that not knowing leaves open. The person who knows everything cannot be taught anything new. Their cup is full. But the person who can say, "I don't know," with honesty and openness, has made space to receive wisdom from unexpected places. They remain teachable. They remain curious. They remain alive to possibility. This does not mean we should pretend not to know things we genuinely understand. That would be false humility. It means being honest about the limits of our knowledge. It means being comfortable with uncertainty. It means recognizing that there is always more to learn, always deeper understanding available, always perspectives we have not yet considered. Beginner's mind invites us to approach life with this comfortable not knowing, to meet each moment without the burden of needing to have everything figured out, to allow questions to remain questions instead of rushing to answers that might be premature or incomplete. Let us explore a story that shows this teaching. In a village at the edge of a great forest, there lived a woodcutter named Koji, who was known for his confident opinions on every subject. If there was a dispute about the best way to build a house, Koji had an answer. If farmers disagreed about planting methods, Koji knew which was correct. If neighbors argued about the meaning of a new law, Koji could explain it definitively. People would often come to Koji seeking his opinion, and he was always happy to provide it. He prided himself on never being uncertain, never appearing confused or ignorant. "A man should know his own mind," he would say. "Uncertainty is weakness." One autumn, a traveling monk stopped in the village for the night. The villagers gathered to hear news from other places, and someone mentioned that Koji always had answers to any question. The monk seemed interested in this and asked to meet Koji. That evening, the monk visited Koji's home. They sat together drinking tea while Koji explained his various opinions and insights. The monk listened quietly, nodding occasionally, but saying little. Finally, the monk asked, "May I ask you a question?" "Of course," Koji said confidently. "Ask anything you like." "What is the purpose of a human life?" Koji did not hesitate. "The purpose of human life is to work hard, support your family, follow the laws, and honor your ancestors. This is obvious to anyone who thinks clearly." The monk nodded. "I see. And how do you know this?" "It is what everyone knows. It is what our traditions teach. It is common sense." "But what if someone from a different village with different traditions gave a completely different answer? Would they be wrong and you right? Or might there be truth in multiple answers?" Koji frowned. "Obviously my answer is correct because it is based on proper understanding." "I see," the monk said gently. "And tell me, have you ever been uncertain about anything?" Koji felt uncomfortable with this question. Uncertainty serves no purpose. A man either knows something or he does not. If he does not know, he should learn until he does. What if there are some questions that have no single correct answer? What if some truths are too large to be captured by one perspective? Then one must think more carefully until the correct answer becomes clear, Koji insisted. The monk was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have traveled to many villages and spoken with many wise people. Some say the purpose of life is to reduce suffering. Others say it is to seek enlightenment. Others say it is to express creativity or show compassion or understand nature. Each speaks with confidence, and each has good reasons for their view. When I hear all these different answers, each one thoughtful and sincere, I find myself thinking, I don't know which is true. Perhaps they all contain truth. Perhaps the question is larger than any answer I could give." Koji shook his head firmly. "You have simply not thought deeply enough to arrive at the correct answer. If you thought more clearly, the truth would become obvious." The monk smiled sadly. "Perhaps you are right. Or perhaps my not knowing allows me to keep learning, while your certainty prevents you from hearing perspectives you have not yet considered." After the monk left, Koji felt unsettled. He told himself the monk was simply confused, unable to think clearly. But something about the conversation stayed with him. A few weeks later, a dispute arose in the village. A farmer's goat had gotten loose and eaten vegetables from a neighbor's garden. The neighbor demanded payment for the damaged crops. The farmer said it was an accident and he should not have to pay. Both men came to Koji asking for his opinion. Koji listened to each side and immediately had his answer ready. "The law is clear," he began. But then he stopped. For the first time, he found himself uncertain. The law seemed to support the neighbor's claim. But the farmer was poor and had many children. The neighbor was wealthy and the loss was small. What was fair? What was right? What was compassionate? "I need time to think about this," Koji said, surprising himself with these words. Both men looked shocked. Koji never needed time to think. He always knew. That night, Koji sat alone feeling troubled. He had built his entire identity on being the one who knew. But now he was discovering gaps in his certainty. The more he thought about the dispute, the more complex it seemed. Every answer he considered had problems. Every solution left something unaddressed. For the first time in his adult life, Koji allowed himself to think the words, "I don't know." It felt frightening at first, like standing at the edge of a cliff. But as he sat with this feeling, something unexpected happened. The pressure of always needing to know lifted slightly. The burden of maintaining certainty eased. In the space created by not knowing, he found himself able to think more freely. He began to consider perspectives he had never examined before. What if there was not one right answer, but several partial answers? What if wisdom sometimes meant holding multiple truths at once? What if the most honest thing he could say was simply, "This is complicated, and I am not certain of the best solution"? The next day, Koji met with both men again. "I have thought carefully about your dispute," he said. "And I must tell you honestly, I do not know the single correct answer. The situation has complexity I did not see at first. Perhaps we could talk together and find a solution that addresses both your concerns, rather than simply declaring one of you right and the other wrong." The men looked surprised, but they agreed. Through conversation, they found a middle way. The farmer would replace some of the damaged vegetables from his own garden. The neighbor would accept this and help the farmer repair the fence that had allowed the goat to escape. Both men left satisfied, and their friendship remained intact. Other villagers heard about this and were puzzled. Koji had always been so certain. Now he was admitting he did not know? Was he losing his wisdom? But Koji was discovering something the monk had tried to show him. Real wisdom sometimes looks like not knowing. It looks like being open to multiple perspectives. It looks like remaining teachable instead of certain. He began to speak differently. Instead of pronouncing definite opinions, he would say things like, "This is how it appears to me, but I may be seeing it incompletely," or "I am uncertain, but perhaps we could explore this together." Some people were disappointed. They wanted the old Koji who had confident answers for everything. But others were drawn to this new humility. They found they could talk with him more honestly now, exploring questions together instead of simply receiving his pronouncements. Years later, a young person asked Koji, "Are you wiser now than you were before?" Koji thought for a long moment. "I know less than I thought I knew," he said. "But I understand more. When I pretended to know everything, I stopped learning. Now that I can admit what I don't know, every day brings new understanding. The more comfortable I become with not knowing, the more genuine wisdom seems to find me." Take a gentle breath now. Notice what it feels like to let yourself not know something, even just for a moment. This story shows us something important about the gift of not knowing. Koji's certainty had made him rigid. It prevented him from seeing complexity. It stopped him from learning. When he finally allowed himself to say, "I don't know," he became more wise, not less. We can all recognize this pattern in ourselves. The pressure to have opinions, to know what we think, to be able to explain and defend our positions. This pressure can make us hold on to views even when they are incomplete or flawed. It can prevent us from hearing other perspectives. It can stop us from growing. Beginner's mind teaches us that admitting uncertainty is not weakness. It is honesty. It is openness. It is the foundation for real learning. When we can say, "I don't know," without shame, we create space for wisdom to emerge from unexpected places. This does not mean we should be wishy-washy or avoid forming views. It means holding our views lightly enough that we remain open to revision when we encounter new information or perspectives we had not considered. Let us explore another story that reveals a different aspect of this teaching. There was once a renowned scholar named Professor Natsume who taught at a prestigious academy. He was respected throughout the country for his deep knowledge of classical literature. Students came from distant provinces to study with him, and his interpretations of ancient texts were considered authoritative. One spring, a new student arrived at the academy. Her name was Yuki, and she came from a remote mountain village. She had studied the classical texts on her own, without formal teachers, learning from whatever books she could find. In her first class, Professor Natsume was lecturing on a famous poem. He explained its meaning with his usual confidence and precision. He told the students exactly what the poet had intended, what each image represented, what message the poem conveyed. Yuki raised her hand. "Professor, may I ask a question?" "Of course," he said. "How do you know what the poet intended?" "The poet lived 400 years ago and left no explanation of the poem. Might there be other ways to understand it?" Professor Natsume frowned slightly. Through careful study of the historical context, the poet's other works, and the literary conventions of the period, we can determine the correct interpretation with reasonable certainty. But might the poem hold meanings the poet did not consciously intend? Might different readers find different truths in the same words? The professor felt irritated. Literary analysis is not about personal feelings or subjective impressions. It is about understanding what the text actually means through rigorous scholarly methods. "I see," Yuki said quietly. "Thank you for explaining." But in the following weeks, Yuki continued to ask questions that unsettled Professor Natsume. She would offer interpretations he had never considered. She would point out ambiguities in texts he thought were clear. She would suggest that certainty about ancient meanings might sometimes be an illusion. At first, Professor Natsume dismissed her questions as naive. She lacked proper training. She did not understand scholarly methodology. But gradually, her questions began to trouble him. One evening, he was preparing a lecture on a poem he had taught dozens of times. He knew this poem thoroughly. His interpretation was established and well regarded. But as he reviewed his notes, Yuki's words echoed in his mind. "How do you know what the poet intended?" Professor Natsume found himself looking at the poem differently. He had always read it as a meditation on the changing seasons. But what if it was also about the impermanence of human relationships? What if it held both meanings simultaneously? What if his confident interpretation had closed off other ways of understanding? He stayed up late that night, reading the poem again and again. Each time, he saw new possibilities. Images he had glossed over revealed unexpected depths. Lines he had explained with certainty became ambiguous, rich with multiple potential meanings. The next day, he walked into his classroom feeling strange. For the first time in decades, he was not entirely certain what he would say about the poem. He began his lecture differently than usual. "Today we are going to read a poem I have taught many times. I have always explained it in a particular way. But recently, I have been questioning whether my certainty about its meaning might have prevented me from seeing other possibilities." He read the poem aloud, then paused. "I find myself in an unusual position. I am not certain what this poem means. I have theories, interpretations I can support with evidence. But I realize I don't actually know what lived in the poet's heart when these words were written. I don't know all the meanings these words might hold." The students looked surprised. Professor Natsume never admitted uncertainty. "So today," he continued, "instead of telling you what this poem means, I would like us to explore it together. Let us read it carefully and see what emerges. Let us allow not knowing to be our starting place." The discussion that followed was unlike any class Professor Natsume had ever led. Students offered insights he had never considered. They noticed connections he had overlooked. They brought their own experiences and perspectives to the poem, revealing layers of meaning his scholarly approach had never uncovered. Yuki raised her hand during the discussion. "Professor, when you admitted you were not certain, something opened up. We all feel permission to explore honestly instead of trying to arrive at the answer you want us to find." Professor Natsume felt something shift inside him. For decades, he had believed his role was to eliminate uncertainty, to provide definitive answers. But Yuki had shown him something different. Not knowing could be generative. It could create space for genuine discovery. It could allow new understanding to emerge. From that day forward, his teaching changed. He still shared his deep knowledge and careful analysis, but he held it more lightly. He presented his interpretations as possibilities rather than conclusions. He became comfortable saying, "I don't know," when faced with genuine ambiguity. His students found this new approach more engaging. Instead of memorizing his interpretations, they learned to think for themselves. Instead of seeking certainty, they learned to live with productive uncertainty. Years later, a colleague asked Professor Natsume, "Do you worry that admitting uncertainty damages your authority as a scholar?" He smiled. "I used to worry about that. But I've discovered something interesting. When I pretended to know everything with certainty, students either believed me without question or quietly disbelieved me. Either way, they did not engage deeply with the material. Now that I can admit what I don't know, they take me more seriously, not less. My honest uncertainty invites their honest exploration." Take a gentle breath and notice what it feels like to allow something to remain uncertain, to let a question be a question. This story reveals another aspect of the gift of not knowing. Professor Natsume's certainty had limited not only his own understanding, but also his students' learning. When he allowed himself to not know, he created space for genuine inquiry and discovery. We can see this dynamic in many areas of life. Parents who pretend to have all the answers raise children who either become dependent or rebellious. Leaders who cannot admit uncertainty make poor decisions because they ignore information that contradicts their views. Experts who cling to certainty stop advancing their fields. But when we can hold our knowledge lightly, when we can remain open to being wrong or incomplete in our understanding, we remain capable of growth. We become better teachers because we inspire curiosity rather than demanding memorization. We become better leaders because we can learn from others and change course when needed. The practice of not knowing does not mean abandoning discrimination or judgment. It means recognizing that our current understanding, however deep, is always partial. There is always more to learn, always new perspectives to consider, always the possibility that what we think we know might need revision. Beginner's mind holds knowledge and not knowing together. We can know what we have learned while remaining open to what we have not yet discovered. We can have well-considered views while staying curious about other possibilities. We can be both knowledgeable and humble. This balance is at the heart of genuine wisdom. The wise person knows much, but holds their knowledge lightly. They have strong understanding, but remain teachable. They can say with confidence, "This is what I have learned," and with equal confidence, "There is much I do not yet understand." In your own life, where might you be clinging to certainty that prevents you from learning? Where might admitting, "I don't know," create space for new understanding? This question is not meant to undermine your knowledge or make you doubt yourself. It is an invitation to notice where your certainty might have become rigid, where your need to be right might be preventing you from seeing clearly. The beginner's mind approaches each moment not knowing what it will bring. This not knowing is not anxious or fearful. It is open and curious. It says, "I don't know what will happen, and that is okay. I will meet whatever comes with attention and care." This comfortable uncertainty allows us to remain responsive rather than reactive. When we think we know what will happen, what someone will say, how a situation will unfold, we stop paying attention to what is actually occurring. But when we can admit we don't know, we remain alert, present, available to respond to reality as it actually is. The gift of not knowing is freedom. Freedom from the burden of always needing to be right. Freedom from the pressure of maintaining certainty. Freedom to change our minds when we encounter new information. Freedom to say, "I was wrong," without shame. Freedom to learn throughout our lives, instead of spending our energy defending what we think we already know. Let us look at one more story that shows how not knowing can guide us through difficult moments. There was once a village doctor named Sato who had practiced medicine for 30 years. She had seen countless patients, treated numerous illnesses, and built a reputation for her skill and knowledge. People trusted her completely. One day, a mother brought her child to Dr. Sato. The child had been suffering from a mysterious illness for weeks. Fever, weakness, strange pains that moved through the body. Dr. Sato examined the child carefully and prescribed the treatment she thought would work. But the child did not improve. Dr. Sato tried a different approach. Still no improvement. She tried a third treatment, then a fourth. Nothing helped. The child grew weaker. The mother began to lose faith. "You are supposed to be the best doctor in the region," she said, her voice breaking with worry and frustration. "Why can't you cure my child?" Dr. Sato felt the weight of this question. Her reputation was built on knowing what to do, on having answers. But faced with this suffering child, she had to acknowledge a difficult truth. "I don't know what is wrong with your child," she said quietly. "I have tried everything I know, and nothing has helped. I am sorry." The mother began to cry. But then Dr. Sato continued, "Because I don't know, I want to try something different. There is a doctor in the capital city who has studied illnesses I have never encountered. I think we should take your child there. I will write everything I have observed and send it ahead so he can begin thinking about the case before you arrive." The mother looked surprised. She had expected Dr. Sato to keep trying, to insist she could solve the problem herself. But Dr. Sato's honest admission of not knowing had opened a path forward. They took the child to the capital. The doctor there, reading Dr. Sato's careful notes and examining the child, recognized a rare condition he had encountered only once before. He prescribed a specific treatment, and within days, the child began to improve. When the mother returned to the village with her healthy child, she thanked Dr. Sato profusely. "You saved my child by admitting you did not know," she said. Dr. Sato nodded. "For years, I thought my job was to always have answers. But I have learned that sometimes the most important thing a doctor can say is, 'I don't know, and I need help.' If I had kept pretending I knew what to do, your child might have died while I protected my reputation." From that day forward, Dr. Sato practiced medicine differently. She was still skilled and knowledgeable, but she was also comfortable saying "I don't know" when she encountered something beyond her understanding. She consulted with other doctors more freely. She read constantly to expand her knowledge. She approached each patient with humility, recognizing that there would always be mysteries she had not yet solved. Her willingness to admit not knowing made her a better healer. Patients trusted her more, not less, because they knew she would be honest with them. Other doctors respected her because she could ask for help without shame. Most importantly, more patients recovered because she was willing to seek answers beyond what she already knew. Take a gentle breath. Notice how not knowing can sometimes be the most honest, most helpful response we can offer. This story shows us how not knowing can literally save lives. Dr. Sato's willingness to admit what she did not know allowed her to find help for her patient. If she had clung to certainty, if she had kept insisting she knew what to do, the outcome might have been tragic. We face similar moments in our own lives, though perhaps not as dramatic. Moments when admitting "I don't know" opens possibilities that certainty would close. Moments when our honesty about the limits of our understanding allows others to help us or helps us help others more effectively. As you rest with this teaching, you might notice where you feel the pressure to know, to be certain, to have answers. What would it feel like to release that pressure, even slightly? What might become possible if you could approach more of your life with the honest humility of not knowing? This is not about becoming passive or giving up discernment. It is about remaining teachable. It is about staying open to life's constant lessons. It is about recognizing that the more we learn, the more we discover how much we don't know, and finding that discovery liberating rather than frightening. Beginner's mind begins with the empty cup. It continues with fresh eyes. And it deepens with the comfortable, even joyful recognition that we don't know everything. We never will, and that is perfectly fine. In fact, it is the very condition that makes continued growth and understanding possible. We have been trained to evaluate everything we encounter. Is this good or bad? Do I like it or not? Is it useful or useless? Beautiful or ugly? Right or wrong? Our minds move quickly to sort, categorize, and judge almost everything that enters our awareness. This habit of constant evaluation happens so automatically we rarely notice it. Someone speaks and we immediately judge whether we agree or disagree. We taste food and decide if we like it or not. We meet a person and form opinions about them within moments. The weather arrives and we label it good or bad. Experience flows past us and we stand there like judges, pronouncing verdicts on everything. This constant judging creates a particular relationship with life. We are always positioned above or outside of our experience, evaluating it rather than participating in it. We become critics of our own lives instead of participants in them. This stance separates us from direct experience and often closes us off from what we might learn or discover. There is another way to meet life. Beginner's mind approaches experience with curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of immediately deciding whether something is good or bad, worthy or unworthy, we can meet it with genuine interest. We can ask, "What is this?" instead of declaring this is good or this is bad. This does not mean we lose our ability to discern or make wise choices. It means we allow things to reveal themselves before we decide what they are. We remain curious long enough to actually see what we are encountering instead of immediately covering it with our opinions. Children naturally have this quality. A child finding a beetle does not immediately judge whether the beetle is good or bad. They watch with fascination. They notice how it moves, what it does, how its shell catches the light. They are curious before they are evaluative. As we grow older, we often lose this natural curiosity, replacing it with rapid judgment. Beginner's mind invites us to recover that sense of wonder, to approach our lives with genuine curiosity about what each moment contains, to postpone our judgments long enough to actually perceive what is in front of us, to remain interested in life instead of constantly evaluating it. Let us explore a story that shows this teaching. There was once a potter named Ren who had achieved great skill in his craft. He could create vessels of perfect symmetry and elegant proportion. His work was displayed in fine homes and sought after by collectors. People would examine his pottery and praise its beauty, and Ren felt satisfied with his mastery. One spring, a new potter moved into a workshop near Ren's studio. His name was Ichiro, and he had come from a distant province. Ren went to welcome him and happened to arrive while Ichiro was working at his wheel. Ren watched Ichiro create a simple bowl. The bowl was uneven in places. The rim was not perfectly level. The sides were slightly irregular. Ren felt a surge of judgment. This potter clearly lacked skill. His technique was poor. The bowl was badly made. But as Ren watched, he noticed something interesting. Despite the bowl's imperfections, or perhaps because of them, it had a quality he had never achieved in his own work. It looked alive. It seemed to have grown from the clay rather than being forced into shape. There was something organic and natural about it that made his own perfectly symmetrical work suddenly seem stiff by comparison. Ren felt uncomfortable with this observation. His first impulse was to dismiss it. The bowl was objectively inferior according to the standards he had learned. Its flaws were obvious. His judgment was correct. But something made him pause. Instead of leaving with his judgment intact, he approached Ichiro. "I noticed your bowl," he said carefully. "It is very different from how I was taught to work." Ichiro smiled and held up the bowl, turning it slowly in his hands. "Yes, I imagine it is. My teacher believed that clay has its own nature that wants to express itself. He taught me to work with the clay rather than imposing my will upon it." "But the rim is uneven," Ren pointed out, still caught in his evaluative mind. "Yes," Ichiro agreed easily. "It is. Does that make the bowl less useful? Less beautiful? Or does it make it different from what you expected?" Ren found he could not answer immediately. He had judged the bowl as badly made, but now he was not certain. Perhaps it was not badly made, but differently made. Perhaps his standards were not the only way to understand pottery. "May I watch you work sometimes?" Ren asked, surprising himself with the request. Over the following weeks, Ren spent hours watching Ichiro at the wheel. At first, he kept noticing what he considered mistakes. Places where Ichiro could have made the clay more even, more symmetrical, more perfect. His trained eye kept pointing out flaws. But gradually, Ren began to watch with curiosity instead of judgment. Instead of evaluating every movement Ichiro made, he tried simply to understand what Ichiro was doing and why. He stopped comparing Ichiro's work to his own standards and started to see it on its own terms. He noticed that Ichiro seemed to listen to the clay. When the clay wanted to move in a particular direction, Ichiro would follow that impulse, rather than forcing it into a predetermined shape. When a slight irregularity appeared, Ichiro would work with it instead of correcting it. The result was pottery that looked spontaneous and alive. One day, Ren tried to work the way Ichiro did. He sat at his wheel and attempted to follow the clay's nature instead of imposing perfect symmetry. But years of training made this difficult. His hands kept automatically correcting every irregularity. His mind kept judging every departure from perfect form as a mistake that needed fixing. He realized his habit of judgment had become so automatic that it was controlling his hands without his conscious choice. He could not simply decide to work differently. He had to change his entire relationship to his craft. Ichiro noticed his struggle. "You are fighting yourself," he observed. "Your hands are trying to make what your mind has decided is wrong. What if you approach the clay with curiosity instead? What if you asked what wants to happen here? Instead of deciding this should look like that?" Ren took this advice to heart. He began each session at the wheel by pausing to release his judgment. He would take several breaths and remind himself to be curious rather than evaluative, to watch what emerged rather than forcing what he had decided should emerge. The change did not happen quickly. Years of habitual judgment do not dissolve overnight. But gradually, Ren found he could create pottery that had some of the aliveness he admired in Ichiro's work. His pieces became less rigidly perfect, but more interesting. They lost some technical precision, but gained something he could only call presence. His customers noticed the change. Some preferred his old work, but many were drawn to his new pieces, saying they felt more human somehow, more touched by actual hands and heart. Years later, a student asked Ren what he had learned from Ichiro. "I learned that my judgment was closing doors that curiosity could open," Ren said. "I thought I knew what good pottery should look like. That certainty prevented me from discovering what pottery could be. When I replaced judgment with genuine curiosity, my work came alive." Rest for a moment. Notice where your attention naturally goes. Feel the weight of your body being supported right now. This story shows us how judgment can limit our perception and our possibilities. Ren almost missed learning from Ichiro because his immediate judgment dismissed Ichiro's work as flawed. Only when he could set aside evaluation and approach with curiosity did he discover something valuable. We can see this pattern in our own lives. How often do we dismiss something or someone based on immediate judgment? How often does our quick evaluation prevent us from learning, discovering, or experiencing something meaningful? Our minds are so trained to judge that we often form opinions before we have truly looked at what we are encountering. Beginner's Mind suggests a different approach. Before we decide what something is, before we determine whether it is good or bad, useful or useless, we can meet it with curiosity. We can allow ourselves to be interested in it, to explore it, to see what it reveals when we approach it without predetermined conclusions. This shift from judgment to curiosity changes everything. Conversations become more interesting because we are listening to understand rather than listening to evaluate and respond. New experiences become richer because we are exploring them rather than immediately deciding whether we like them. Even difficult situations become more workable because we are curious about what they contain rather than simply resisting them as bad. Let us explore another story that reveals a different aspect of this teaching. In a village famous for its gardens, there lived a gardener named Hana who maintained the grounds of a wealthy family's estate. She had studied garden design for many years and had strong opinions about what made a garden beautiful. Paths should curve in particular ways. Rocks should be placed according to specific principles. Plants should be arranged to create carefully planned views. Hannah took pride in her knowledge. When she walked through other gardens, she would notice everything that was wrong. Plants in poor locations. Rocks placed without proper consideration. Colors that clashed. Her trained eye caught every flaw, every departure from good design principles. One autumn, the family asked Hannah to create a new garden in a corner of their property that had been neglected. It was a difficult space. The ground was uneven and rocky. Large old trees created deep shade in some areas while leaving others in full sun. Most gardeners would have seen it as a problem that needed correction. Hannah's first impulse was exactly this. She began planning how to level the ground, remove some rocks, perhaps cut back the trees to create more consistent light. She would force this difficult space to conform to proper garden principles. But something made her pause. She remembered a garden she had seen years ago that had deeply moved her. It had not followed the rules she had learned. It had worked with the natural features of the land rather than correcting them. At the time, she had judged it as poorly designed. But the memory had stayed with her, suggesting that perhaps there had been something there her judgment had not allowed her to see. Instead of immediately implementing her plan to correct the space, Hannah decided to spend time simply being in it. She visited at different times of day, in different weather, in different seasons. She sat quietly and observed. She let go of her ideas about what the space should be and became curious about what it actually was. She noticed that the uneven ground created natural paths where water flowed during rains. The rocks that seemed randomly placed were actually positioned in patterns that responded to the slope of the land. The deep shade under the old trees held different plants than the sunny areas, creating distinct zones that were already beautiful in their own way. Most surprisingly, she discovered that the space already felt peaceful. It did not need to be corrected. It needed to be appreciated and gently enhanced, not radically changed. Hannah began working with curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of asking, "What is wrong here that I need to fix?" she asked, "What is already here that I can support?" She placed rocks to emphasize the natural paths rather than creating new ones. She chose plants that thrived in the existing conditions rather than trying to change the conditions. She allowed the space to teach her what it wanted to become. The garden that emerged was unlike anything she had designed before. It did not follow the classical principles she had studied, but it had a naturalness and harmony that made people want to sit quietly in it. Visitors said they felt as if they had discovered a wild place that had always been there, not entered a designed garden. The family was delighted. "This is more beautiful than the formal gardens," they told Hannah. "It feels alive." Hannah knew what they meant. By approaching the space with curiosity instead of judgment, by working with what was there instead of imposing what should be there, she had created something genuine. Her knowledge and skill were still present in the garden, but they served curiosity rather than judgment. She began to apply this approach to all her work. When she encountered a plant growing in an unexpected place, instead of immediately deciding it was wrong and removing it, she would ask, "Why is it thriving here? What does this teach me about this spot?" When she saw natural patterns in the land, instead of correcting them to match her design principles, she would work with them. Her gardens became known for their naturalness and peace. People could not always explain why they loved them, but they felt drawn to spend time in them. Hana understood that this quality came from approaching the work with wonder rather than judgment, with curiosity about what wanted to emerge rather than certainty about what should be imposed. A young apprentice once asked Hana how she knew what to do in each situation. "I have learned not to know too quickly," Hana replied. "My first response is still often judgment. But I have trained myself to pause and become curious instead. This curiosity reveals possibilities that judgment would never see. The land teaches me what it wants to be. The plants show me where they want to grow. My role is not to force my vision onto the space, but to help the space express its own nature." Rest for a moment. Notice your surroundings as they are. Allow yourself to simply be where you are. This story shows us how curiosity can reveal possibilities that judgment closes off. Hana's knowledge and training were valuable, but they became truly useful only when paired with curiosity about what was actually present. When she stopped trying to impose predetermined ideas and started asking genuine questions, her work deepened. This teaching applies to every aspect of our lives. In relationships, we often judge people quickly and then interact with our judgments rather than with the actual person in front of us. At work, we may judge situations as problems before we have fully understood what they contain. With ourselves, we judge our thoughts and feelings as good or bad before we have truly explored what they are trying to show us. Beginner's mind suggests that curiosity is wiser than judgment. Not because judgment is always wrong, but because curiosity allows us to see more completely before we decide. When we approach life with genuine interest in what is actually present, we discover depth and possibility that quick evaluation misses. There is one more story worth hearing that shows this teaching from yet another angle. A teacher named Kaito taught calligraphy to students in a small mountain town. He had studied under a famous master and knew the traditional forms perfectly. He could write each character with flawless technique, and he taught his students to do the same. Kaito believed that calligraphy had right ways and wrong ways. A stroke should begin at a certain point and move in a certain direction. The pressure should vary in specific ways. The balance of ink and speed should follow established principles. When students deviated from these forms, he would correct them firmly. "This is wrong," he would say. "It should be done this way." His students learned to write beautiful, technically correct characters. But Kaito noticed something troubling. Their work was perfect but lifeless. It looked like copies of proper form rather than living expressions of the characters' meanings. One day, a traveling calligrapher stopped in the town and attended one of Kaito's classes. This calligrapher was very old, his hands gnarled with age. When Kaito invited him to demonstrate for the students, the old man agreed. He picked up a brush and wrote a single character. The stroke trembled slightly from his aged hands. The ink pooled in places where it should have been even. The form was not technically perfect, but the character seemed to breathe on the page. It held a quality that none of the students' perfect characters possessed. Kaito felt defensive. This work violated several principles he taught. Yet he could not deny that it was beautiful in a way his technically perfect work was not. After the class, Kaito spoke with the old calligrapher. "Your work is very moving," he said carefully, "even though it does not follow proper form in several places." The old man smiled. "You notice the imperfections? Good. A trained eye should see such things. But tell me, did you also notice what the imperfections made possible?" Kaito had to admit he did not understand the question. "When I was young," the old calligrapher said, "I also believed in perfect form. I judged every deviation as a mistake. But as I aged and my hands became less steady, I had a choice. I could try desperately to maintain perfect technical form, or I could become curious about what my trembling hands might create." He held up his gnarled fingers. "These hands cannot make perfectly smooth lines anymore. At first I judged this as loss. But when I became curious instead, I discovered that the slight irregularity brings something alive to the characters. The tremor is not wrong. It is different. And that difference carries something that perfect smoothness cannot." Kaito thought about this for several days. He had spent years training his students to avoid any deviation from proper form. Every irregularity was a mistake to be corrected. But the old calligrapher suggested that curiosity about irregularity might reveal something valuable. He began to approach his teaching differently. When a student made what he would have called a mistake, instead of immediately correcting it, he would ask, "What happened there? What did your hand want to do?" Sometimes the deviation was simply carelessness and needed correction. But sometimes there was something interesting in it, some spontaneous expression that deserved exploration. His students' work began to change. They still learned proper form and technique, but they also learned to be curious about what emerged in the moment of creation. Their calligraphy became more varied, more alive. Some pieces followed traditional form perfectly. Others explored new possibilities. All of them carried more life than the technically perfect but lifeless copies they had made before. Kaito realized he had been using judgment to protect himself from uncertainty. If he could label everything as right or wrong, correct or incorrect, he did not have to remain in the discomfort of not knowing whether something was valuable. But this certainty had closed him off from discovery. When he allowed himself to be curious about what he had previously judged as wrong, he found treasures he had been dismissing. Rest for a moment. Notice the gentle movement of your breath. Feel it entering and leaving, natural and effortless. These stories all point toward the same understanding. Judgment closes doors that curiosity opens. When we approach life determined to evaluate everything quickly, we miss much of what life contains. But when we can meet our experience with genuine curiosity, with real interest in what is actually present, we remain available to learn, to discover, to be surprised. This does not mean we abandon all evaluation or stop making necessary distinctions. We still choose what to eat, what work to do, whom to spend time with. But we can make these choices from a foundation of curiosity rather than automatic judgment. We can discern without dismissing. We can have preferences without rigidity. The practice of approaching life with curiosity rather than judgment is one of the most accessible aspects of beginner's mind. We can practice it right now, in this moment. Instead of immediately deciding whether we like or dislike what we are experiencing, we can become curious about it. We can explore it. We can let it reveal itself before we decide what it is. This shift in attention changes our relationship with everything. Problems become interesting rather than just difficult. People reveal complexity we would have missed if we had judged them quickly. Our own thoughts and feelings become sources of insight, rather than things to reject or cling to, based on whether we judge them as good or bad. Beginner's mind sees life as endlessly interesting, always offering something to discover. Not because life is always pleasant or easy, but because curiosity finds depth and meaning even in challenges. When we stop evaluating everything and start being genuinely curious, we discover that life is always teaching us if we remain willing to learn. As you rest with this teaching, you might notice the difference between judging and being curious. Both are ways of meeting experience, but they create very different relationships with life. Judgment sorts and dismisses. Curiosity explores and discovers. Judgment thinks it already knows. Curiosity remains interested in what might be revealed. The beginner's mind chooses curiosity. Not because judgment is always wrong, but because curiosity keeps us alive to possibility, keeps us engaged with reality as it actually is, keeps us learning throughout our lives. This is the gift of approaching life with wonder rather than evaluation. There is a quality that children possess naturally, before the world teaches them to be otherwise. They approach life with openness and wonder. They ask questions without embarrassment. They look at ordinary things with genuine fascination. They laugh easily. They cry freely. They exist fully in whatever moment they are experiencing. As we grow older, we learn to set aside these qualities. We are taught that constant questioning is annoying. That wonder about ordinary things is naive. That expressing emotions freely is immature. That being fully present in the moment is impractical when there are responsibilities to attend to. We learn to be serious, controlled, and focused on the future. We call this growing up. But something important is lost in this process. We lose touch with the kind of natural wisdom that children carry. Not the wisdom that comes from experience and learning, but the wisdom that comes from being open to life as it actually is. Children have not yet built the walls of assumption and habit that block our direct experience of reality. They have not yet learned to live primarily in their thoughts about life instead of in life itself. When Zen teachers speak of beginner's mind, they often point to this childlike quality. Not childishness, which is immaturity and selfishness, but childlikeness, which is openness and wonder, the ability to meet life freshly, the capacity for genuine curiosity, the willingness to be delighted by simple things. This teaching does not ask us to become naive or to pretend we have not learned what we have learned. We cannot unknow what we know. We cannot erase our experiences or return to actual childhood. But we can recover some of what we lost when we decided we needed to be serious adults all the time. We can learn to hold our adult knowledge and responsibility while also maintaining the openness and wonder of a child. We can be competent and effective while remaining genuinely curious. We can have deep understanding while staying available to surprise and delight. This balance is what the teaching points toward. Let us explore a story that shows this quality. In a monastery nestled between mountains, there lived an old master named Ryokan, who was beloved by everyone who knew him. He was learned and wise, respected for his deep understanding of Zen teachings. Yet there was something about him that was different from other serious masters. He seemed to carry a quality of lightness and joy that was unusual in someone of his standing. One autumn afternoon, some village children were playing near the monastery. They had come into the temple grounds and were running and laughing among the gardens. Most monks would have shooed them away, explaining that this was a place for serious practice, not for children's games. But when Ryokan heard their laughter, he came outside to see what was happening. The children froze when they saw him, expecting to be scolded. Instead, Ryokan smiled widely. "What are you playing?" he asked with genuine interest. "We are playing hide and seek," one brave child answered. "But we will leave if we are disturbing you." "Disturbing me?" "Not at all. In fact, "May I play with you?" The children looked at each other in confusion. This old monk wanted to play hide and seek? Surely he was joking. But Ryokan was not joking. "I used to love this game when I was young," he said. "I wonder if I am still any good at hiding." The children, delighted and amazed, agreed to include him. One child was chosen to be the seeker and closed her eyes while everyone else ran to hide. Ryokan gathered his robes and scurried off to find a hiding place, moving with surprising agility for his age. He squeezed himself behind a large barrel near the storage building, giggling to himself as he tried to make himself small. The children, peeking from their own hiding places, could hardly believe what they were seeing. This respected master, who gave profound teachings to serious students, was playing hide and seek with absolute commitment and joy. When the seeker found Ryokan crouched behind the barrel, he laughed delightedly and complimented her on being so clever. They played several more rounds, with Ryokan taking his turn as seeker and searching with theatrical exaggeration, pretending not to see children who were barely concealed, then suddenly discovering them with mock surprise. As the afternoon grew late, the children needed to return home. They thanked Ryokan profusely for playing with them. "Will you play with us again?" they asked. "Any time you wish," Ryokan replied. "I find that hide and seek is excellent practice for a Zen monk. After all, we are all seeking what is hidden, are we not?" After the children left, one of Ryokan's students approached him, looking puzzled and perhaps slightly disapproving. "Master," he said, "I don't understand. You are a great teacher. Why do you spend your time playing children's games? Doesn't this diminish your dignity?" Ryokan looked at his student with kind eyes. "Tell me, when you saw me playing with those children, what did you see?" "I saw you acting like a child," the student said. "And how did I seem? Troubled? Burdened? Lost in worries about the past or future?" The student had to admit that Ryokan had seemed completely happy, fully present, without a trace of the anxiety that usually marked people's faces. "When I play with children," Ryokan explained, "I remember how to be completely present. Children do not play while thinking about their dignity or reputation. They play with their whole hearts. This is not childishness. This is a kind of wisdom that we adults have forgotten." He gestured to the garden around them. "I can teach you about emptiness and Buddha nature. I can explain the sutras and guide you in meditation. But if I cannot also show you how to be fully alive in a simple moment of play, then what good is all my knowledge?" The children taught me today. They reminded me what it feels like to be completely here, completely now, without the burden of self-consciousness. The student thought about this. But surely we cannot go through life just playing. We have responsibilities, practices, work to do. Of course, Ryokan agreed. But we can bring that quality of wholehearted presence to everything we do. When I chop vegetables with my whole heart, like a child playing. When I sit in meditation, I sit with the same complete attention a child gives to building with blocks. The childlike quality is not about what we do. It is about how we meet what we do. From that day forward, the student began to notice this quality in his master's every action. Ryokan swept the floor with the same delight the children showed in their game. He drank tea as if tasting it for the first time. He listened to others with complete, unguarded attention. He laughed easily at simple things. He could be deeply serious about important matters, but he never carried the heavy burden of self-importance. Years later, after Ryokan had died, people remembered him not just for his wisdom, but for his joy. They told stories of how he would stop his teaching to watch ants carrying crumbs, fascinated by their determination. How he would dance in the rain like a child. How he could be profoundly wise in one moment and delightfully playful in the next, without any contradiction between these qualities. His students came to understand what he had been teaching through his example. Being childlike does not mean being foolish or irresponsible. It means maintaining the openness, wonder, and wholehearted engagement that children have naturally. It means not taking ourselves so seriously that we forget how to be fully alive. Take a gentle breath now. Feel the air moving through you, natural and easy. Allow yourself to soften just a little. This story shows us what it means to be childlike rather than childish. Ryokin's willingness to play with children was not a lapse in dignity or wisdom. It was an expression of his freedom from the rigid seriousness that often comes with adult life. He could be playful without being immature, joyful without being foolish, light-hearted without being irresponsible. We can see in our own lives how we have learned to be constantly serious. We feel we must maintain a certain image. We worry about looking foolish or undignified. We believe that being responsible means being somber. But this constant seriousness creates a kind of rigidity that closes us off from simple joys and genuine presence. Beginner's Mind invites us to recover some of that childlike quality without losing our adult wisdom and capability. We can be competent at our work while remaining genuinely curious about what we are doing. We can have deep understanding while staying open to wonder. We can take our responsibilities seriously without taking ourselves too seriously. Let us explore another story that reveals a different aspect of this teaching. There was once a master painter named Sotatsu who had achieved great fame for his sophisticated and elegant works. His paintings hung in temples and palaces. He was known for his refined technique and subtle use of color. Other artists studied his work to learn his methods. But as Sotatsu grew older, something began to trouble him. His paintings were technically perfect, admired by everyone, displayed in the finest places. Yet he felt they lacked something essential. They were beautiful but somehow lifeless. Correct, but cold. They demonstrated mastery but did not touch the heart. One day, Sotatsu was walking through a market when he saw a group of children drawing on the ground with sticks. They were making simple pictures in the dirt. A bird, a flower, a house. The drawings were crude, with no technique or refinement. But they were made with such complete absorption and joy that Sotatsu stopped to watch. One child was drawing a fish. The proportions were wrong. The fins were too large. The body was uneven, but there was something alive about it. The child was not worried about technique or trying to impress anyone. She was simply creating with her whole heart, delighted by what was emerging under her stick. When the child finished, she stepped back to admire her fish, then immediately began drawing another one, completely different from the first. No hesitation, no self-doubt, no concern about whether it was good enough. Just pure engagement with the act of creating. Sotatsu watched for a long time. He saw in these children's crude drawings something his sophisticated paintings had lost. A directness, a spontaneity, a quality of immediate expression that did not pass through layers of technique and self-consciousness. He went home and stood in front of his painting table, looking at his fine brushes and expensive inks. All his training, all his mastery, suddenly seemed like a burden rather than a gift. His knowledge of proper technique was preventing him from painting with the same directness those children had shown. Sotatsu made a decision. He would try to paint like a child, not to become childish in his work, but to recover the childlike quality of immediate, wholehearted expression. But he quickly discovered this was much harder than he expected. When he tried to paint simply and directly, years of training took over. His hand automatically created refined brushstrokes. His eye automatically corrected proportions. His mind automatically judged each mark as good or bad according to his sophisticated standards. He could not simply paint. He could only paint as a master, with all the self-consciousness and control that came with that identity. For weeks, Sotatsu struggled with this. He would start a painting trying to work with childlike directness, but within moments he would be caught in his habitual ways. The spontaneity he sought kept slipping through his fingers. Finally, he decided to try something different. Instead of trying to paint like a child, he would remember what it felt like to be a child. He closed his eyes and recalled his earliest memories of discovering painting. The first time he had mixed colors and marveled at how red and blue became purple. The delight of making a mark on paper and seeing it stay there. The pure joy of creating something that had not existed a moment before. Holding these memories, he opened his eyes and began to paint. Not trying to be childlike, but allowing the childlike part of himself, which still existed beneath all his training, to guide his hand. Something shifted. The painting that emerged was unlike anything he had created before. It still showed his skill and knowledge, but these served a more immediate kind of expression. The work had technical mastery, but also spontaneity. Sophistication, but also directness. It was the work of an adult who had recovered the child's capacity for wholehearted engagement. When people saw this new painting, they responded differently than they had to his previous works. His earlier paintings had inspired admiration. This one inspired joy. There was something alive in it that touched people directly, beyond aesthetic appreciation. Sotatsu continued to develop this way of working. He never lost his skill or knowledge, but he learned to hold them more lightly. He could use his mastery without being controlled by it. He could create sophisticated works that also had the freshness and vitality of a child's drawing. Other painters asked him how his style had changed. "I learned from children," he would say. Not to abandon skill, but to remember why we create in the first place. Not for reputation or to demonstrate mastery, but for the simple joy of bringing something into being. Children know this naturally. We adults must remember it. Take a gentle breath. Notice the weight of your body fully supported. Let yourself rest exactly where you are. This story shows us another aspect of being childlike. It is not about losing skill or knowledge. It is about recovering the directness and wholehearted engagement that children have before they learn to be self-conscious. Sotatsu did not become a less skilled painter. He became a more complete painter by integrating his adult mastery with childlike spontaneity. We can see this pattern in many areas of life. We learn techniques and accumulate knowledge, which is valuable. But in the process, we often lose the simple joy and directness that drew us to the activity in the first place. Musicians become so focused on technique, they forget why they loved music. Writers become so concerned with proper form, they lose their authentic voice. Workers become so efficient, they forget to care about what they are doing. The teaching of childlikeness invites us to recover that original engagement, not by abandoning what we have learned, but by holding it lightly enough that it serves our genuine expression rather than controlling it. we can be skilled and spontaneous, knowledgeable and fresh, experienced and open. There is one more story that can help us understand this teaching. An elderly tea master named Senno Rikyu was preparing tea for a gathering of sophisticated guests. These were people of refinement who knew tea ceremony well and could recognize every subtle aspect of proper form. They expected perfection from someone of Rikyu's reputation. As the guests arrived, they noticed something unusual. Rikyu had arranged the tea room with great care, as always. But he had placed a single wildflower in the alcove. Not an expensive cultivated flower arranged according to formal principles, but a simple wildflower that children might pick from a field. It leaned slightly to one side, imperfect and unpolished. Some guests found this charming. Others were puzzled. Why would a master tea practitioner use such a simple, ordinary flower when the occasion called for something more refined? When everyone was seated, Rikyu entered and began preparing the tea. His movements were, as always, the result of decades of training. Every gesture was precise. Every moment was considered. But there was something in his manner that was not simply technical mastery. He moved with a quality of fresh attention, as if preparing tea for the first time. As he whisked the tea, a child's voice could be heard from outside, calling to a friend. Rikyu paused and smiled slightly at the sound, as if appreciating a moment of spontaneous life breaking into the formal ceremony. Then he continued his preparation. When he served the tea, one of the guests commented on the wildflower. "Master, your flower arrangement today is very unusual. We expected something more formal for such a gathering." Rikyu looked at the flower with obvious affection. "I chose this flower this morning while walking through the field. When I saw it leaning toward the sun, so alive and unself-conscious, I felt it had something to teach that no formal arrangement could show. A child would pick such a flower without questioning whether it was fancy enough. I wanted to remember that kind of direct appreciation." Another guest asked, "But does this not violate the principles of tea ceremony? Should we not maintain proper form?" "The purpose of tea ceremony," Rikyu replied, "is not to follow rules for their own sake. It is to create a space where people can be fully present together. If our adherence to proper form makes us stiff and self-conscious, we have lost what matters most. This flower reminds us to be here now, simply and directly, like children who do not yet know they are supposed to be impressive." The tea gathering that followed was different from usual formal ceremonies. Because Rikyu had introduced that note of simplicity and directness through the wildflower, the guests found themselves relaxing into genuine presence. They were not performing proper tea ceremony. They were actually experiencing tea together. When the gathering ended, one guest thanked Rikyu and said, "Today, you taught us something beyond technique. You showed us how to bring childlike attention to mature practice." Rikyu smiled. The highest mastery looks like simplicity. The deepest sophistication makes room for spontaneity. After decades of learning proper form, we can finally learn to be as direct as children. This is not abandoning what we have learned. It is completing what we have learned. Take a gentle breath now. Feel yourself settling more deeply. Let your awareness rest in this simple moment. These stories all point toward the same understanding. Being childlike does not mean being immature or rejecting adult wisdom and capability. It means maintaining the qualities that children have naturally: openness, wonder, directness, wholehearted presence, the ability to find joy in simple things. As we grow older, we can hold together both adult wisdom and childlike openness. We can be responsible and spontaneous, skillful and fresh, knowledgeable and curious. This integration is what beginner's mind points toward. Think about how children approach something new. They do not stand back analyzing and judging. They dive in with their whole being. When a child sees a puddle, they do not think about whether splashing in it is dignified. They splash. When they hear music, they do not worry about whether they are dancing correctly. They move. This is not foolishness. This is a kind of wisdom we have forgotten. We have learned to filter everything through layers of self-consciousness. Before we act, we consider how we will appear. Before we speak, we calculate whether we sound intelligent. Before we try something, we worry about failing. These filters serve some purposes, but they also separate us from direct experience and genuine expression. Children have not yet built these filters. They exist more directly in their experience. When they are happy, they laugh without restraint. When they are sad, they cry without shame. When they are curious, they ask questions without embarrassment. They have not yet learned that they are supposed to maintain a careful image of themselves. The teaching does not ask us to abandon all self-awareness or act without consideration. We cannot return to the actual innocence of childhood, nor would that be useful. We have learned important things through our adult experience. We have developed capabilities that children do not possess. The invitation is to integrate what we have learned with the natural openness we once had. Ryokan showed this integration perfectly. He was a respected master who could give profound teachings, but he could also play hide and seek with complete commitment and joy. He did not see these as contradictory. His wisdom included the ability to be fully present in simple pleasure. His mastery included the capacity for spontaneous play. Sotatsu discovered that his sophisticated technique became truly valuable only when he recovered the childlike quality of wholehearted engagement. His skill served him best when it was not burdened by constant self-consciousness. He learned to create from both his training and his spontaneous joy. Sen no Rikyu demonstrated that the highest refinement makes room for simple directness. He spent decades mastering proper form, not to become rigid, but to become free. His mastery was complete enough that he could choose simplicity without it being a failure of skill. He could appreciate a wildflower with a child's directness while preparing tea with a master's precision. The practice of recovering childlike qualities is available to us right now. We can notice when we have become too serious, too rigid, too concerned with maintaining our image. We can allow ourselves moments of genuine delight in simple things. We can approach familiar activities as if encountering them for the first time. We can let ourselves play, wonder, and laugh without worrying about whether we look dignified. This morning, did you rush through washing your face, or did you feel the water on your skin? Did you gulp down your tea while thinking about the day ahead, or did you taste it? These small moments offer opportunities to be present the way children are naturally present. Not making a big effort, just allowing ourselves to actually experience what we are doing. The childlike quality is not something we add on top of our adult lives. It is something we allow back in. It was there before we learned to suppress it. It is still there, waiting patiently beneath all our learned seriousness. As you rest with this teaching, you might notice where you have become too serious, too controlled, too concerned with proper form. This noticing is not to judge yourself, but to see where you might allow a little more lightness, a little more spontaneity, a little more childlike wonder to enter your adult life. Perhaps you will notice a moment tomorrow when you catch yourself being too serious about something that does not require such heaviness. Perhaps you will remember to actually taste your food instead of just eating it. Perhaps you will allow yourself to laugh freely at something that amuses you, without worrying about whether your laugh sounds proper. The beginner's mind is naturally childlike because it has not yet learned to be otherwise. It approaches each moment with fresh eyes, genuine curiosity, and wholehearted engagement. These qualities are not childish. They are the foundation of true wisdom. They are what allow us to remain alive and learning throughout our lives instead of becoming rigid in our patterns and assumptions. We began this exploration of beginner's mind with the empty cup. We continued with fresh eyes. We deepened with comfortable not knowing. We discovered curiosity over judgment. And now we see that all of these qualities come together in a childlike openness to life. Not the blindness of childhood, but the wonder of childhood combined with the wisdom of experience. This is what beginner's mind offers us. There is something remarkable about the nature of time that we often overlook. Each moment that arrives has never existed before. This breath you are taking right now has never been breathed. This particular arrangement of thoughts, sensations, and circumstances has never occurred and will never occur again. Reality is not repeating itself. It is constantly creating something entirely new. We do not usually experience life this way. We wake up and think, another morning. We eat breakfast and think the same meal again. We see familiar people and think, I know them already. Our minds create the experience of repetition by grouping similar things together and calling them the same. But this sameness is an illusion created by our thinking, not the actual nature of reality. The morning that arrives today has never arrived before. Your body is literally not the same body it was yesterday. Millions of cells have changed. The person sitting across from you has been shaped by another day of living. The meal you eat draws its ingredients from plants and animals that grew in unique conditions, affected by particular weather, handled by specific people on a particular day. Nothing repeats. Everything is always beginning for the first time. Beginner's mind is not something we create or achieve. It is what happens when we recognize this truth. When we stop telling ourselves the story of repetition and sameness, we discover that we are always meeting life for the first time, because life is always occurring for the first time. Each moment is a beginning, because each moment is genuinely new. This understanding shifts everything. We are not trying to see things as if they were new. We are recognizing that they actually are new. We are not pretending we do not know what will happen. We are acknowledging that we genuinely do not know, because this exact moment has never happened before, and what emerges from it has never emerged before. Let us explore a story that reveals this truth. There was once a monk named Dogen who had practiced meditation for many years. Each morning, he would sit facing a plain wall in the meditation hall. He had sat facing this same wall thousands of times. The wall was made of simple white plaster with no decorations or distinguishing features. Just a blank wall. After years of this practice, Dogen began to feel that his meditation had become routine. Each morning felt the same as the one before. He would sit, watch his breath, notice his thoughts, and eventually the bell would ring to end the session. The same thing, day after day, year after year. He wondered if perhaps he should seek a different teacher or a different practice, something that would bring fresh insight. One morning, Dogen sat facing the wall as usual. But something was different in his perception, though he could not immediately say what. The wall looked the same. The meditation hall was the same. His cushion was in the same position. Everything appeared identical to how it had appeared yesterday and the day before and the day before that. Yet, as he settled into his sitting, Dogen found himself actually seeing the wall instead of just looking at it. He noticed tiny variations in the plaster surface that he had never observed before, though they must have been there all along. A small irregularity here, a slight shadow there. The way morning light caught the texture differently than it had caught it yesterday, because the sun was in a minutely different position and the season had shifted imperceptibly forward. As he continued to sit, Dogen realized something profound. This wall had never existed before. Not this exact wall, in this exact light, seen by his eyes in this exact moment of his life, with his mind in this particular state. He had been telling himself the story that he was sitting in front of the same wall, but that was his thinking, not reality. Reality was offering him a completely new wall each morning, and he had been too caught in his mental story of repetition to notice. The same realization extended to everything else. This breath was not the same as yesterday's breath. This moment of sitting was not the same as any other moment of sitting. Each arising thought was appearing for the first and only time. His entire practice, which he had thought of as repetitive, was actually fresh in every instant. Dogen sat with this recognition for the remainder of the session. When the bell rang, he stood slowly and looked around the meditation hall. Everything appeared both exactly the same and completely new. The hall had not changed. His perception had not changed. What had changed was the story he was telling himself about what he was experiencing. He had been experiencing repetition because he was thinking about repetition. When he stopped that thinking and simply met what was actually present, he discovered it was always new because it was always different, even when it appeared similar. From that morning forward, Dogen's practice transformed. He still sat facing the same wall each day, but he was no longer practicing in the same meditation hall. He was practicing in whatever meditation hall existed in that moment, which had never existed before and would never exist again. This was not a technique or a way of trying to see things differently. It was simply recognition of what was actually true. Years later, Dogen would teach his students about this understanding. People think that practicing the same thing every day means doing the same thing, he would say. But nothing is ever the same. Each moment of practice is the first moment of practice. Each breath is your first breath. If you think you have sat in meditation before, you are lost in thinking about the past. Sit now, for the first time, because this sitting has never happened before. Take a gentle breath now. Feel this breath, which has never been breathed before. Notice how it moves through you, unique and unrepeatable. This story shows us something essential about the nature of beginner's mind. Dogen was not trying to see the wall differently. He was not employing a technique or forcing himself to perceive freshness. He simply recognized what was actually true. The wall was always new. He had just been covering that newness with thoughts about repetition and sameness. We do this constantly in our lives. We wake up thinking, another day. But this day has never existed before. We see someone we know well and think, I know this person. But this version of them, shaped by all the moments that have occurred since we last saw them, has never existed before. We do familiar tasks thinking, I've done this 1,000 times. But this particular doing, in these circumstances, with this body, in this moment, has never happened before. The recognition that each moment is genuinely new does not require effort. It simply requires stopping the mental habit of calling things the same when they are not actually the same. When we stop telling ourselves the story of repetition, we discover we are always encountering life for the first time. Let us explore another story that reveals this truth from a different angle. In a village by the sea, there lived an old fisherman named Isamu who had fished the same waters for 60 years. He knew every current, every rock, every place where fish gathered at different times of year. Younger fishermen would come to him for advice, and he would share his vast knowledge of these waters. But Isamu had a practice that the younger fishermen found strange. Each morning before going out, he would stand at the shore and look at the ocean as if seeing it for the first time. He would observe the color of the water, the pattern of the waves, the quality of the light. He would watch for several minutes before preparing his boat. One young fisherman asked him about this. "Uncle Isamu, you have fished these waters for 60 years. Surely you know them well by now. Why do you stand and look so carefully each morning?" Isamu smiled at the question. "Come, stand with me," he said. They stood together at the water's edge, looking out at the sea. "What do you see?" Isamu asked. "I see the ocean," the young man replied. "The same ocean we fish every day. Look more carefully. Is it the same ocean?" The young fisherman looked again. "Well, the tide is different than yesterday, and the color is slightly different. But yes, it is the same ocean." "Is it?" Isamu asked gently. "This water that you see before you, where was it yesterday? Some of it has flowed in from far away. Some of it has evaporated. The waves you see are not the same waves that were here yesterday. They arose from different winds, different currents. The fish swimming beneath the surface are in completely different positions than they were yesterday. The light hitting the water comes at a different angle because the earth has moved in its orbit." He paused to let the young man absorb this. "I have been fishing here for 60 years, and in all that time, I have never fished the same ocean twice. Each morning, the sea is new. If I think I already know these waters, I will miss what they are actually showing me today." The young fisherman thought about this. "But your experience must count for something. You know more about fishing than anyone in the village." "My experience helps me understand what I see," Isamu agreed. "But it only helps if I actually see what is here now. If I assume today's ocean is the same as yesterday's, my experience becomes a barrier instead of a help. I look at the water through my memories instead of with my eyes." He gestured to the horizon. "Every morning, I stand here and let the ocean teach me what kind of day it is today. Not what kind of day I remember. Not what kind of day I expect. What kind of day is actually happening right now. This is why my boat comes back full when others come back empty. They fish the ocean they remember. I fish the ocean that is actually here." Over the following weeks, the young fisherman tried to practice this way of looking. At first, it felt artificial. He would stand at the shore and try to see the ocean as new, but it still looked like the same ocean he had seen his whole life. He was trying to see differently, which was still thinking about seeing rather than actually seeing. But gradually, something shifted. One morning, he stood at the shore without trying to see anything in particular. He just looked. And suddenly, he noticed that the water near the rocks had a quality he had never seen before. A particular way the light was moving through it. He noticed the exact pattern of the waves, which was different from any pattern he had seen before. He noticed the specific way the wind was moving across the surface. The ocean revealed itself as completely new, not because he was trying to see it that way, but because he had stopped covering it with his thoughts about what it should be. When he went out fishing that day, he found fish in a place he had never looked before, because he was responding to what was actually present rather than what he expected to be present. Years passed, and the young fisherman became skilled and successful. Other young fishermen would ask him for his secrets. "What did old Isamu teach you?" They would ask. "He taught me that I do not know these waters," he would reply. "No matter how many years I fish them, I do not know them because they are different every day. This not knowing allows me to see what is actually here instead of what I remember or expect. This is why the ocean provides for me." Take a gentle breath. Notice the sensations in your body right now. This exact combination of sensations has never existed before and will never exist again. This story reveals another aspect of how each moment is a beginning. Isamu's 60 years of experience could have closed him off from seeing what was actually present. His knowledge could have become a barrier, causing him to see the remembered ocean instead of the actual ocean. But because he recognized that each day brought genuinely new conditions, his experience served him rather than blinding him. We often think that the more familiar something becomes, the more we know about it. But familiarity can actually prevent knowing if we stop looking because we think we already see. The person we have known for 20 years is not the same person they were yesterday. The work we have done for a decade is not the same work it was last week. Our own thoughts and feelings are not repeating themselves but arising fresh in each moment. When we recognize this, experience becomes valuable in a different way. Our past learning informs our present perception but does not replace it. We bring what we know to what we see, but we also remain open to what we see that we did not know. This is the balance that beginner's mind offers. Not ignorance of the past, but freedom from being trapped by it. Let us explore one more story that brings together everything we have discovered about beginner's mind. There was once a master calligrapher named Teshu who had devoted his entire life to perfecting his art. For 50 years, he had practiced writing the same characters over and over. His skill was so refined that each stroke he made was considered perfect according to the classical standards. Masters from across the country recognized him as having achieved the highest level of technical mastery. But something troubled Teshu. Despite his perfect technique, his work felt lifeless to him. It demonstrated mastery but lacked vitality. It was correct, but not alive. He began to wonder whether all his years of practice had actually taken him further from something essential rather than closer to it. One day, a young woman came to study with him. Her name was Kana, and she had been practicing calligraphy for only 2 years. When Teshu watched her write, he saw that her technique was still developing. Her strokes were not as refined as his. Her characters showed the marks of someone still learning. But there was something in her work that moved him. A quality of freshness and vitality that his own perfect work lacked. He asked her, "How do you approach your practice?" Kana seemed surprised by the question. "I do not know if I approach it in any particular way," she said. "I try to be present for each stroke. Each time I write a character, it feels like writing it for the first time. I do not think about the character I wrote yesterday or the one I will write tomorrow. I simply write this one, now." Teshu recognized something in her words. This young student was demonstrating what he had lost somewhere in his decades of refinement. She was meeting each moment of practice freshly because she had not yet accumulated the burden of too much knowing. Her not yet developed mastery allowed her a directness that his perfected skill had covered over. That night, Teshu sat with his brush and ink. Instead of writing with all his accumulated mastery, he tried to write a single character as if he had never written before. As if this were his first encounter with ink, paper, and brush. As if this character were appearing for the first time in history. It was extraordinarily difficult. His hand wanted to follow the grooves of 50 years of practice. His mind wanted to draw on all his refined knowledge. Every part of his training pulled him toward the perfected technique that had become habitual. But he persisted. He tried to let go of everything he knew and simply meet the blank paper with this brush in this moment. Not to write poorly or to pretend he did not know how to write, but to bring his skill without the burden of accumulated certainty about what perfect calligraphy should look like. After many attempts, something shifted. Teshue wrote a character that surprised him. It showed all his skill and refinement, but it also had a spontaneity and freshness he had not achieved in decades. The character looked both masterful and as if it had been created in that very instant, with no past and no future, complete in itself. Teshue stared at what he had created. This was what he had been seeking. Not the abandonment of skill, but skill-serving genuine presence. Not the rejection of knowledge, but knowledge held so lightly that it did not prevent fresh response to the moment. He continued to explore this way of working. Some days he succeeded in touching that quality of freshness. Some days he fell back into pure technique. But gradually, his work transformed. It maintained all its technical perfection, but gained something that observers could only call aliveness. Other calligraphers studied his later work, trying to understand what had changed. His technique is the same, they would say. But something is different. The work breathes now. Teshue himself found it difficult to explain. When younger students asked him how he achieved this quality, he would say, "Every character I write is my first character. Not because I pretend not to know how to write, but because this particular character, in this moment, with this brush, on this paper, has never existed before. When I recognize this truth and respond to it, the character comes alive." He would pause and look at his students with kind eyes. "All the years I spent perfecting my technique were necessary, but they became truly valuable only when I learned to set them aside and meet each moment as a beginner. The highest mastery is indistinguishable from beginner's mind. After 50 years of learning how to write perfectly, I had to learn how to write for the first time again." Take a gentle breath now. Feel yourself resting here. This moment of rest has never occurred before. Allow it to be exactly what it is. This story brings together all the threads we have explored. Teshue's journey shows us that beginner's mind is not about lacking skill or knowledge. It is about recognizing that each moment is genuinely new and bringing our full capacity to meet that newness rather than covering it with our assumptions and habits. We have explored how fullness blocks us and emptiness opens us. How fresh seeing reveals what familiarity conceals. How not knowing creates space for genuine understanding. How curiosity discovers what judgment dismisses. How childlike openness allows wholehearted presence. And now we see how all of these qualities come together in the recognition that each moment is a beginning. This is not a technique to practice or a state to achieve. It is simply what becomes visible when we stop covering reality with our stories about repetition and sameness. Life is always offering itself freshly. We are always being given the opportunity to meet it for the first time. This opportunity does not depend on us doing anything special. It is the nature of existence itself. The breath you are breathing right now has never been breathed before. The thoughts moving through your mind have never moved through your mind in exactly this combination before. The sounds around you are arising in a unique moment that has never occurred and will never occur again. You are not repeating your life. You are living it for the first time, continuously. When we recognize this, everything changes. Not because we make something happen, but because we stop being fooled by our mind's story of repetition. The work we do every day becomes fresh work. The people we know become new people. Our own lives become adventures of constant discovery instead of routines we endure. This is what beginner's mind reveals. Not a special state we achieve through effort, but the truth about reality that becomes obvious when we stop telling ourselves it should be different. Each moment is a beginning because reality itself is always beginning. Time does not repeat. Experience does not repeat. Life does not repeat. You are always at the beginning, whether you recognize it or not. This moment is your first moment. This breath is your first breath. This thought is your first thought. This is not a metaphor or a way of looking at things. This is simply what is true. When we live from this recognition, we bring the empty cup, the fresh eyes, the comfortable not knowing, the genuine curiosity, and the childlike wonder together naturally. We do not need to remember to practice these things. They are simply what emerges when we meet life as it actually is, rather than as we think it should be. Beginner's mind is not the beginning of a journey towards some future achievement. It is the recognition that we are always at the beginning, because beginning is all there ever is. Each moment starts fresh. Each breath inaugurates itself. Each instant of existence arrives as the first instant there has ever been. This is the gift that Zen teachings offer. Not a path to somewhere else, but the recognition that we are already here, always for the first time, always at the beginning, always meeting life in its constant newness. When we see this, we stop waiting for something better and discover that what is actually here has never stopped being miraculous. As you rest now, you might simply notice this truth. You do not need to do anything with it or make anything happen. Just recognize that this moment, exactly as it is, has never existed before and will never exist again. You are here for the first time. You are breathing for the first time. You are aware for the first time. This is beginner's mind. Not something to attain, but something to recognize. Not a goal to reach, but the truth of how you have always been meeting life, whether you noticed it or not. Every moment is a beginning. Every breath starts fresh. Every instant offers itself as new. And in recognizing this, you discover that you are always already home. As we come to the end of our time together tonight, take a moment to notice where you are. Feel the surface supporting you. Notice the gentle rhythm of your breath, which continues on its own, without effort or struggle. Tonight, we have explored beginner's mind through 6 different angles. We discovered how emptying our cup creates space for new understanding, how seeing with fresh eyes reveals what familiarity conceals, how comfortable not knowing opens us to genuine wisdom, how curiosity uncovers what judgment dismisses, how childlike wonder allows wholehearted presence, and how each moment offers itself as genuinely new, a constant beginning. These are not separate teachings but different ways of pointing toward the same truth. When we release our need to know everything, to have everything figured out, to keep everything under control, we discover a natural openness that was there all along. This openness is beginner's mind, not something we create, but something we recognize. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. The seeds have been planted. They will grow in their own time, in their own way. You may find yourself tomorrow meeting a familiar moment with fresh eyes, approaching a well-known person with genuine curiosity, admitting "I don't know" without shame. These are the teachings working in you, not through effort, but through simple recognition. As you drift towards sleep now, let everything soften. Let the day release its hold. Let your body rest completely, knowing that tomorrow will bring its own fresh beginning. You will wake to a morning that has never existed before, ready to meet it however you meet it. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.